Hey everyone, I'm NornQueenAlexis and welcome back to the channel and welcome to my special guest Sterling.
Hi everybody.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Today we're taking on the biggest, actually not the biggest Imperial tank, because it's actually the Imperialis, which is much bigger than this thing.
Yeah.
And there's also the AdMech version thingy that's bigger.
The Ordinatus.
Yep.
But this is the granddaddy of all of them. So.
Yes, this is the Baneblade. God, if I was good at editing right now, I'd put that scene in from Dawn of War. You know exactly which one.
What? We lost 1,000 Baneblades or something?
No, it was 100 Baneblades.
Oh,
you know, one of the rarest and hardest tanks to produce.
Yeah. Incompetence.
So, today, we're going over the Imperial Armor Volume 1 Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy book. And in it, it tells us the stats of all of the vehicles in 40K. Actually, a good chunk of them. I am working through and trying to get as many of these books. If you like this series and you happen to have Imperial Armor Volume 3, I desperately need it. So, to continue the series, obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
So, Sterling, before we start all of this, why don't you tell them your qualifications?
Sure. For those of you who didn't check in on the last video, you can find it on Alexis's channel. I was in the armed services for 5 years. I specialized primarily in airborne infantry tactics. I'm also a classically trained historian, and I'm working with ASU on some fun projects in the future.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a lot of fun, but let's get to the Baneblade. Okay, so this is on page 79 of the Imperial Armor first book, and we are going over the Baneblade. Sterling, would you like to read some of this?
I guess we could. Just
Yeah.
line by line? Do we want to go through it? All right. The Baneblade and its variants are amongst the oldest Imperial tank designs still in use. Created using Dark Age standard template construct technology, it uses many systems that are now unique to its construction. This ancient STC data is limited to only a handful of forge worlds, and most of the original Baneblades come from Mars itself.
Which is very cool.
Yeah, and we'll get to why that's a little important later on, especially with, 100 Baneblades being sent off from one world at a time?
Yep.
So, yeah, like we were saying, the Baneblade is, not only is it here in the book as being one of the oldest tank designs still in production, but this was one of the original super heavy vehicles to ever be in the game.
Yep. And it even predates the Imperium coming from the Dark Age technology. So they don't even know how to really replicate its systems.
Yeah, and as we saw when we looked at the ammunition in the last episode, they use rocket-propelled rounds for the main guns, which just kind of lends to its whole credence of size and everything that we're going to get to here in a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, just everything coming from Mars being hyper-specialized means that you don't see very many of these, or at least you shouldn't.
No, like every guard regiment only has like 3 to 5 of them.
Yeah. Which, even then, it's a galaxy-spanning thing, so we're talking...
Millions of them.
Yeah, a couple millions of these, but you'll never see more than a handful in your lifetime.
Yep. So, it is claimed that in the past there were whole divisions of Baneblades in the Emperor's service, but today an Imperial army is fortunate to have a company of 3, like we just said.
Yep.
And...
Or usually only a single Baneblade will be available. So, yeah.
And that's an entire regiment of guardsmen. That's like the Cadian 101.
Yeah, and the concept of like regiment versus division and things like that, it's all a matter of scale. Like, multiple regiments will make up a division in the modern military. So you can only imagine, when it's saying a whole division of Baneblades are rolling around, we're talking thousands of these as part of one command structure rolling around a planet.
Pretty sure at that point they would be breaking apart the surface of the planet with how heavy they are.
You'd be surprised, but we'll get into that when we look at the stats.
Yep. So, where are they? This is because there is an immense demand for the Baneblade, both for its highly destructive abilities and its survivability. So, even in the lore, this thing is survivable, which is interesting. And it does have a proper tank design, like, for its shape.
Yeah, it being scaled up compared to the Lehman Russes, we're going to get into how its size varies between them.
Yeah.
But probably the best part of this whole little fluff section is the very next sentence. It's also for the morale boost seeing such a behemoth gives the troops.
And again, that's one of the biggest things. It's kind of like seeing a Space Marine on the battlefield for Imperial Guardsmen. It's more impressive than practical.
Yeah, even if it's not super practical, like if I had the option, I'd want one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would want one too. I mean, I couldn't cruise down the street or anything in this thing.
No, definitely not.
For these reasons, the millennia have seen a slow but sure increase in the number of counterfeit Baneblades seeing service in Imperial armies. Now, the counterfeit Baneblades, I actually looked this up. That's the Shadow Sword, the Storm Hammer, and the variants of the Baneblades. The Adepts of Mars consider those counterfeits.
I mean, it would make sense if it's a standard template construct. Like, these are the pieces you get. No other options. It's that myth about the original Ford car being offered in multiple colors, but only if you bought it in black.
Yep.
So I could see where, an AdMech fabricator general could be upset that somebody decided to improve upon a holy design.
Yep. And also, does that actually happen in today's military, like other countries counterfeiting our technology?
Not necessarily counterfeiting, that's kind of the wrong word for it, but in America at least, we sell a lot of our military surplus to other smaller nations.
For the betterment or worse?
Yeah, usually for the worse. But it's things like old Bradleys are sent to Thailand, for instance, and the Thai government buys them up and then slaps a new coat of paint on them, strips out some of the old components, puts some of their own custom ones in. And that's why whenever you do research on like a vehicle, it's very hard to get precise ones unless you're talking about a specific variant type, because every country who gets their hands on them tweaks something in it and then calls it something else.
So that would explain like the Mars pattern Baneblade versus the Armageddon pattern Baneblade.
Yeah, versus the Stormlord. What is it, that alignment chart that you see pop up in memes every once in a while?
Where it's like sword, bane.
Yeah, sword, bane,
hammer, shadow.
And shadow. Yeah.
And then it's the variants all down it.
Yeah, like, what is it? Blade, storm, hammer, and something else. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, so counterfeit vehicles, not really counterfeit, just not approved versions. I'm sure the original designer was rolling in his grave when he saw somebody do something unintentional to his vehicle, but that's what happens.
Yep.
Now, these Baneblades, produced by Forge Worlds eager to secure large military contracts and trade concessions, do not incorporate all the available STC data that is on those from Mars and the few other favored Forge Worlds. While a true Baneblade uses much more powerful rocket-propelled shells in its main battle cannon, a second-generation Baneblade, as the Adepts of Mars refer to these tanks, uses only standard battle cannon ammunition. Similarly, the reinforced mount of the Demolisher cannon in a true Baneblade allows it to lay down a devastating bombardment as it advances, while second-generation Baneblades normally mount a second battle cannon in the hull. These are not the only differences, for the original Baneblade design has improved internal armor bracing, greater engine performance and transmission, superior comms, and tactical logic engines, and all manner of other secondary systems which are far superior to those of the second generation war machines.
There's a lot to unpack in that paragraph.
Yeah, there's a fairly dense one, but essentially it was like we were just talking about, these counterfeit Baneblades that come from secondary Forge Worlds, so that would be your Ryza, your Griffonicus, Metallica, places like that.
Yo, I love Metallica.
I love Metallica too. Anyways, moving away from rock bands. You put your own spin on something, and I love that they're talking about military contracts and trade concessions.
Yeah, this is actually hugely important because in 40K, and this is something that I love from the Sisters' perspective, the Sisters of Battle hate the AdMech. They absolutely hate them because they view the Emperor as the machine god, where they view the Emperor as the perfect human, like the perfect god Emperor. But the Ecclesiary has military contracts with Mars to fabricate all of the equipment that the Sisters of Battle use. In fact, Martyred Lady takes almost all of their equipment exclusively from Mars. And this is not limited to things that they normally have. Stitches of Battle have been issued Storm Ravens, Thunderhawks, Land Speeders, as well as drop pods. The Godwin pattern, or the Demo pattern drop pod is their version of it, but it's essentially just a drop pod. They have drop ships, they have Imperial Navy vessels that they make contracts with, because they're not allowed to have military surplus, but they're allowed to do things in exchange for those things. So in the case of working with Mars, the Ecclesiary will either pay, and there is Imperial currency called thrones, credits, or
Gelt is another one?
There's various between systems and everything, but essentially they'll either pay for the equipment, or the AdMech will, the tech priests of Mars will ask them to go on a crusade to a certain planet that is deemed too dangerous for them. And if they come back, which usually the sisters do, they will grant them all the technology that they required. So there is very possible you could see a Baneblade in the service of the Adeptus Sororitas.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And it's not unusual for individual vehicles to be quote-unquote loaned out to nearby units that are in need, like special detachments, temporary duty assignments. These things happen all the time in the modern military. So it would actually be out of the norm if we didn't see that in 40K. It falls closer in line with what we see with the Deathwatch for Space Marines, for example. How that is a temporary duty that people are loaned out to, and then eventually they come back to their own chapter.
Unless, of course, they become a dreadnought or become a captain.
Yeah,
But that's an exception,
things
not the
happen.
rule.
Yeah, exactly. There's always exceptions to the rule, but it doesn't prove the rule. But yeah, so like trade contracts, military contracts, that is a thing we deal with in modern days, and they are negotiated years in advance. Here in the U.S., we privatized our defense research budget, so
Yeah.
yeah, top military spender. We beat the next 20 countries combined, and 18 of those are allies. Like,
Yep.
Yeah, we're insane here.
We're
But
insane from Earth.
yeah.
Anyway.
Anyways, it is something that you see where people will compete and bid over certain design aspects. And for those who are tech inclined in the audience, I highly recommend you check out the OMFV project. That's the Optionally Manned Fighting Vehicle. And we'll talk about this more when we get to chimeras and stuff like that. But the US military is looking at having a vehicle that can be driven either by remote or by a crew of 2 people. And multiple companies want this contract, so they make their own little janky versions of whatever the contract calls for. In this case, it's essentially a mini tank that can be driven by remote or by a small crew. And you see, this whole paragraph is about how that happens, but with Baneblades. So you may end up with like multiple tech priests of representing different Forge Worlds meeting with heads of different Imperial Guard regiments saying, we can supply this many of this pattern of Baneblade.
Oh, and there is one thing I need to point out. The Baneblade is not exclusive to the Imperial Guard. Obviously, we just said with the sisters. It also sees use with the Space Marines, being one example being the Fortress of Hera, which the Space Marine Ultramarines lost during the battle for Macragge when the Tyranids destroyed it by sending 5 Carnifexes after it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, they just tore it apart and killed its crew.
Yeah, but it's a Carnifex, I don't doubt that.
Yeah. So we're up to the last paragraph.
Yeah, we're up to the last one. There's one sure way for a commander to know if he has a true Baneblade placed under him. Each Baneblade constructed and consecrated on those Forge Worlds that have the original STC are logged and registered with Mars, and is given its own identity number and name, its whereabouts, the war zone it has fought in, the crew rosters, and all of its other history are reported regularly to the originating Forge World, so that the fate of each and every Baneblade might be known, if one knows where to look.
Also, an example of this is the Fortress of Arrogance, which is the best named tank in 40K ever.
Yep, Commissar Yark knew what he was doing most of the time.
Yep. Although, it was more than likely named by the Adepts of Mars.
Yep, more than likely. Military vehicles, they do just get names. Every vehicle has a name. Their crews give them to it. Very rarely will the name become important unless it's like a large battleship or something like that, which I put these things in that sort of weight class.
Yeah, they're definitely considered like a battleship.
Yeah, this would definitely be an heirloom unit that you pass around. And there's actually a thriving sub-community within the militaries of the world where all we do is we talk about the cool heraldry and relics that we get from our history. Like, my unit had a flag that was captured at the Battle of the Bulge, and it has all the signatures of the original 52 members who had survived the conflict.
That's honestly amazing, because that's similar to how relics are bought in 40K, where they're not used very often, but when they are, they're prized possessions.
Yeah, we would have like trophies and statues that were given to us as gifts from fellow fighting organizations that we had trained with around the world. We had, what was it, a Jambia carved, like a curved Arabic dagger, and that had been captured in like Operation Desert Storm off of an enemy combatant, and there's just a whole subculture that you'll never get to know about because it's all on military bases and civilians can't get onto it.
So, interesting thing to go along with that. In the 40K lore, the Blood Ravens, what they do is they train librarians, because they have so many of them. They go around and go to other chapters similar to the Deathwatch, but they put one of their librarians in that chapter to train the the reclusiaries before they become librarians. And in exchange, the company will grant them one of their relics, and they bring it back. Now, granted...
Yeah, totally not stolen.
It isn't stolen. Their new lore is much better.
Yeah.
And their older stuff where it was like, oh, they have the Hammer of Dorn, is a game mechanic and not anything really relevant to the lore.
It's not like how it was in the Second Dawn of War where everything was, oh, this was mysteriously acquired.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a phrase for that in the military. It's called tactically acquiring something. It means you stole it. All right, but now we're here to the part where I get to make a damn fool of myself, and we get to talk about the stats.
I was gonna bring in my Baneblade, just to a Baneblade and a protractor, to show you how offset this cannon is compared to what it says it can do.
Yeah, there's we run into a lot of the same issues as we did with the Lehman Russ. However, I like the placement of the turret
Way better
on this, just because it is going to be more stable when it fires, and it's going to be more stable while it fires on the move. And that's a huge point in like its favor. Tanks can fire on the move. It's not usually recommended.
And it's not
it's not as accurate. It's not as accurate. You can still be really accurate. It depends on what systems are built in. So, like, the Baneblade is massive, and it doesn't move very fast. So you could probably fire some fairly accurate shots with it, because, there's a bump in the ground. Well, the Baneblade rolls over the bump and levels the bump out. It's probably not getting jostled around by terrain like you'd expect in any other sort of armored fighting vehicle.
Now, before we go into this, there is the... there is no breakdown of this thing. I know there's one of the breakdowns of the variants where it shows us the interior and shows us where the shocks and everything are located, though I think we can see where the shocks are located just to have it as a reference. And no, it doesn't. Never mind. I lied.
There we go. we almost didn't believe in ourselves. But this is one of the knockoff ones, quote unquote. Or would it be official? Because it is from Mars.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. So Mars, when somebody modifies an STC, similar to the Ball Predator was a modified STC, the Razorback was an original modified STC. They have to do a ceremony because they're religious, but after that they judge the machine spirit and see if the machine spirit actually accepts the augmentation to it, and if it does, and the machine spirit is stable, it functions. Now, interesting enough, what the machine spirit is a human soul that haunts the machine. And I wish I was kidding about this. The machine spirit can very well be part of a human brain that is attached to a machine that does its last thought and activates the mechanism when you pull a trigger of a gun. It could be a person inside a tube that is literally kept alive inside a spaceship and runs all the systems of the spaceship because the human brain can process faster than any supercomputer. And we're still not sure how it does it. magic.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's magic, essentially. But yeah, and if you want to see like some really cool descriptions of that interaction of like the pilot plugged into an MIU dealing with machine spirits that are, you know, its ancestors potentially. In the Imperial Knights Codex, there's like a lovely little fluff piece. In the Titanicus book, there's actually a whole section where Princeps has to fight and wrangle the previous Princeps out of the Mind Impulse unit. So
I believe in the book Titan Death, though I could have this wrong. It's an Imperial Knight book where an Imperial Knight dies, and its pilot, I cannot remember the exact book, so I do apologize. If you guys know the book, please tell me in the comments down below. But the pilot dies in the night, and the knight itself is still functional, but the Princeps has died. Their soul is being taken into the warp, the realm of souls, and they see a bunch of malicious demons and everything start coming after them. But then they see the Imperial Knight's hand go around the person and pull them into the night, and they become one with the machine spirit. So the machine spirit is actually a real thing in 40k. Their weapons are haunted.
yeah,
You know what? Mars is haunted.
Mars constantly haunted. So there's some cool details in this cross section that we get. One, we see what supposedly the scale of a human being is inside of this, because
Which is
that is a chair.
much smaller than the older descriptions where it was like this fat. So this we can actually see is a much smaller design than what they let on with its size comparison.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense with the breakdown, as with most cross sections. Like the artist and designer has to figure out where would everything go. So a lot of these tend to be more accurate than in initial measurements. But one thing I wanted to point out while we were just on this one, and this is where we get into arguments of like, okay, well, could this thing survive on just a standard world, or would it sink into the ground? Like heavy vehicles tend to have multiple sets of wheels, right? And these guide wheels along the bottom are actually where all the pressure from the tank are pressing down. So if people in the comments want to do a little bit of fun math, I say fun with giant air quotes, you can actually figure out, based off of the weight and the dimensions of these wheels, how much pressure is being exerted on the ground.
Now, you actually did that, didn't you?
Yeah, I ran like rough numbers, and essentially what we came to realize is that if this thing goes on uncompacted earth, so that's just standard soil, sand, clay, it's going to dig a trench as it goes. And it 100% depends on the makeup of the soil and all that fun stuff. But if you live around a military base that has an armored division in it, you've more than likely seen a big triangular yellow sign that says not approved for tanks or tank crossing. Those signs are there for a reason, because just standard tanks can devastate a modern road if they drive on it. This thing is in excess of 300 tons, and that's TONNES, so that is a actual metric ton as opposed to the American version. And this thing's going to tear up any road it travels on, unless it's on a specially designed road, or it's on hyper compacted concrete, the usual MacGuffin 40k construction elements.
Now, when we actually did this math, we did factor in that the tracks themselves are a meter across, and this thing is just so heavy.
Yeah, it is massive. It's the weight of about 4 standard American homes. And if you've ever seen one of those get like pulled down a freeway or something by a massive semi, you can see a lot of this concept of weight has to be distributed everywhere in order for a thing to function. And you have all of this weight riding on tiny strip of track on 2 sides. So it's going to encounter some problems with that on like most American roads. Again, 41st millennium, maybe they found something special, maybe there's rebar in all the concrete, who knows. But as it currently stands, like these things would not do really well on like any standard road system, and that's before you get into issues of size.
Yeah. Honestly, how big would this be? If we can see if this is roughly, because that would be about 4 or 5 foot for the standard human. So it takes up about 4 lines. So this would only be about 20 feet.
Yeah, which I think that's fairly close to what they quote them as being. So
Yeah, it's actually 20 foot and 20 foot, 0.67 feet.
awesome. Well, there we go.
So this is actually accurate to its size.
Yeah, it is. It is a scale drawing, which is unusual in most of these books for things to be in the proper scale.
Now, of course, this isn't factoring in the artistry from Rogue Trader era, where they show that there's 3 stories inside this thing.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
there are some cutaways where they follow the old fluff, and there's some cutaways where they follow the newer fluff. So, as always, make sure that you're following whatever fluff you want to follow.
Keep in
40K.
mind, this is the older fluff. This
Yeah.
is from 3rd, 4th edition.
Yep, and even then, it's like here's the command deck. It is super tiny compared to the rest of the vehicle, and yeah, that's supposed to house the whole crew. But yeah, I digress. We digress. Constantly digress. Let's talk about just basics of.
Wait, that's a shadow
I
sword.
skipped the page. Oh, there we go.
The Baneblade. Yeah?
Professionals. So, when we're looking at these, the standard crew complement, there are multiple gunners and multiple loaders in this vehicle. In
11 barrels of hell.
yeah, 11 different barrels over, was it 4 different weapon systems, not counting the other sponson for like las cannon, heavy bolters. Like the power requirements on this thing would be insane. But because of how large it is, like these side doors that I had such a massive problem with on the Leman Russ, you would almost need these for the crew to get in, for ammunition to be resupplied, because there's no way everyone's coming through that top turret, and there's not a whole lot of space on the front. I really do wish we had, or even I had brought my Baneblade in, and we could show you all that there's not a whole lot of like dead space on a Baneblade.
Yeah, it's
Something is
all
occupied.
weapons.
Yeah.
It's all weapons, vision ports, and everything, which is kind of cool that this vehicle has vision ports.
Yeah, that is something that you'll see in some of the like the chimeras that we're going to talk about later.
The repressor.
The repressor
The
has
Rhino.
them. Yeah, the Rhino has them too. But the idea of like a periscope, like these little windows, there's usually a lot of confusion as to what those are. That's not just a like thick sheet of bulletproof glass and you just put it right there on top of the turret. That's usually a periscope. And so it actually sinks in and down so that somebody can ride with that turret closed. They sit beneath the hatch and they can still see outside.
And we do know that somebody sits beneath it.
Yep, we do. We even see that on the cover. We see it with it opened and the commander riding out in the open air,
For no reason.
like an idiot. I don't know.
Like, that's an easy target.
It is. You only do that if you know you're not going to get shot. But
or you need to raise morale.
yeah, I'm personally constantly paranoid. So, anyways, now an interesting thing. There's a designated comms operator and engineer for these in the crew MTO. MTOs are shorthand for essentially a list of everyone your unit is supposed to have in it and all those qualifications. So in an infantry unit, that's your commander, your executive officers, your medics, and all those sorts of things. Vehicles will have a crew list as well. So seeing a comms operator and engineer means that this thing's not just packing like an extra antenna, it's packing a full-blown communications suite, which we don't see in the cross-section, but it would make sense for a very large vehicle like this to need to coordinate with everyone around it.
Yeah, because this vehicle isn't moving that well.
Yeah, it's not moving very fast. It's at 25 kilometers an hour, which is like 15 miles an hour.
It is moving at 15.5 miles per hour.
Yeah, I can do math. So if it's moving at, and that's like full breakneck speed.
That's on the road going as fast as it can.
Yeah, which means if there's a guardsman walking next to it, a guardsman slapping the side of the tank is going to get no one's attention. So you have to get out of its way. So having extra communications, coordinating your support elements, coordinating refuel and resupply, because even though this thing has a massive fuel tank on the back, like fuel runs out.
Yeah, also a massive fuel tank on the back seems like a massive weakness.
I mean, at least it's on the outside as opposed to the Leman Russ where it was inside. So if it does blow up, it's at least blowing out.
All right, that's fair.
Which is something that we had a criticism on last time. Again, no idea whether you're storing the ammunition on this sucker.
Yeah, because even in the picture, they don't have a place for it.
Well, this one is the Shadow Sword too. So,
yeah, so
like,
this one
there's-
uses an energy weapon.
Yeah,
so
it uses
it's
an
way
energy
different.
weapon. So this massive dynamo you have here in the center, that's probably where you'd store a lot of the ammunition, but this thing's also missing the Demolisher cannon on the front that some of the other ones have. You'd store all the ammunition for the sponson heavy bolters in the sponsons with them more likely, just so that the gunner and
Can
loaders don't
reload
have to roll around in the back. So yeah, it's cramped. No one ever said tanks were like super roomy. If you know of a tank that is exceptionally roomy on the inside, please let me know. I'd love to see it.
Trying to see if we have a different spec for any of the other Lehman Russes. No, we don't.
No.
Not Lehman Russes, Baneblades. Well, that's a shame.
Yeah, but you know, it's bound to happen occasionally, especially with just how massive this thing is. I think we can all agree that Games Workshop probably saw this as a concept design and was like, you know what, we are not going to justify half of it because clearly you don't have to. Everything's turned up to 11.
Yep.
Even the weight of the tank itself at 316 tons.
Oh wait, that one's the other Baneblade. The main Baneblade is 319, wherever
Oh
it
yeah,
says.
319 tons. So it's a difference of about 6,000 pounds. But like this
It's a
thing
difference
is
of 6,000
it's a difference
That's
of
an elephant.
6,000 pounds. Yeah, this thing weighs, like we said, multiple houses. The Chimera, which we'll get to later, that sits at around 28 tons.
Yep.
So this is the weight of 10 Chimeras in essentially 4 Chimeras worth of space. So it's insanely dense, it's insanely heavy. That's going to lead to problems, like we said earlier. Like, bridges are not going to be
No, this
crossable
thing
by
can't
this
cross
thing.
bridges.
Yeah, you can't cross bridges. Due to the height, maybe it can ford, like, small rivers. But it's definitely... This thing needs a whole apparatus just to get it to the fight.
So, interesting side note about the Baneblade itself and how it's transported is there's a larger version of the Valkyrie carrier that picks this thing up and moves it. Now, this is something we brought up in the last video about how actual good the Imperial Guard deployment is, where they can deploy from orbit in under 11 minutes.
Yep.
Now, that's factoring in the fact that all of these aircrafts have an operating capacity that is massive. They can go 1,100 miles per hour, and Baneblades are dropped. They're not actually like let down nice and slowly.
Yeah.
They're literally just dropped. So we know that they can survive the impact of a close to like 300 mile per hour landing.
Yeah. I don't even want to think of the math on that one, because when you land just as a parachutist, you land going at 11 meters per second, and it hurts. Like,
Yeah.
it is painful. It rings your bell. It jostles everything about you.
Now, more than likely, they would land this thing a lot simpler than they do in the video games where they
Yeah.
literally just drop it.
Yeah, fired at the ground in a steel box, if I
Yeah.
remember Dawn of War 2.
Well, it's dropped by a Valkyrie, but yeah.
Yeah.
But this thing is still dropped by a Valkyrie, which is equivalent to dropping a tank with a helicopter that is
Yeah.
can move at 1,100 miles per hour.
Yep.
That's
which,
as fast as hell.
That's very quick. And as we talked about last time, like, there are ways to deploy small tanks out of aircraft, like big, massive things. No.
No.
But again, 40K turned it up to 11. Ignored
this
physics.
This thing's mobility is
It's mainly dependent on the things around it.
it needs to be flown. It needs to be towed.
Yeah. In the novel Baneblade, which came out, like 2008, 2009, something
Yeah,
like
it came
that.
out side by side with the Shadow Sword, and that was during the release of the Shadow Sword from GW.
Yeah, when the Apocalypse book got updated.
Yep.
There's bits of that where they're just driving, and they're driving for like 2 days to get somewhere. And at the speed you go, yeah, you would be driving about 2 days to get anywhere. But that's why there's a very critical part of warfare, which is mobility. Like, the ability to get to a fight supersedes your ability to win a fight. Because if you can win the fight but you can't get there, then you've lost. So if you can get to a place and then work on winning a fight, that's infinitely superior to never being at the right place at the right time. So yeah, like, ground clearance, height, weight, width, like, this thing's huge.
Yeah, what is it? The height is 13.5 meters. The width is 8.4 meters. The length is 13.5 meters. The height is 6.3. For those of you that landed on the moon, I can translate that.
Wow.
The height is 20.6 foot. The length is 44.3 feet. The width is 27.5 feet. This thing is huge.
It is, and again, I'm going to like show off something that's really fun for people who don't live in the U.S. In the 50s and 60s, we revamped our entire highway industry here in the Americas. The main reason we did this was militarily. We wanted like essentially like makeshift runways for planes. That's why there's certain stretches of like freeways that are just open and straight and flat. We also want to make sure that all the bridges could allow for things like our mobile missile systems to pass under them. That's why anywhere you go in America, the freeway height is standardized. So like overpasses are always going to be a certain height. You are always going to have a certain amount of lanes on a freeway as opposed to an interstate. That's why even like the size of your car is regulated in America so that it can fit on those. It can't be wider than like 14 feet.
Yeah.
Which like the Hummer like barely scrapes by that restriction. But you can't be taller than 21 feet because then you're going to clip everything whenever you drive underneath a freeway overpass. So it's actually kind of interesting to note that like the Baneblade could fit under like an overpass here in the States if I'm not misremembering how tall they are.
Yeah.
But it would take up, 3 lanes of traffic.
It would take up the entire highway.
Yeah.
This thing is massive.
And it is tearing the road apart with those treads.
Now, let's get into, so interesting note, that could actually be used for the standardized building structure of 40K roads and everything. So these might actually be more deployed for defensive purposes rather than offensive.
Yeah, it would make sense. It's essentially a giant mobile fortress. If it doesn't have to go somewhere, you get rid of its biggest weakness, which is its speed.
Its speed and weight.
Yeah, like if you don't have to move it, you could just hold down the entire tank. Holding down is when you build essentially an earthworks fortification around a tank and hide the majority of it from enemy incoming fire. And you could easily do that on a Baneblade and still have a majority of its weapon systems able to engage at all sorts of ranges. So that would probably be the smartest way to deploy it. Like have a Valkyrie take it to where it needs to go, have it land, round up a bunch of very sad Imperial Guard soldiers, and have them start filling sandbags and throwing them out in front of your big old tank.
Yeah. In fact, you can have this thing drive around a little bit to dig up trenches for you.
Yeah, you could. You could have that happen a little bit too, especially if it's nice soft mud.
Now, assuming that the power plant and the width of these tracks can get this thing to move, which is a whole nother story of whether or not this thing can actually move, let's talk about the weapon placements.
Yeah, so just because of its sheer size, unlike at the Lehman Russ, it kind of makes sense for this thing to have a side gun, to have anti-infantry weapons placed on its flanks so that it can try to control those, because the big guns are clearly fighting other things.
Yep. Now keep in mind, in 40K, anti-infantry guns are heavy bolters. A heavy bolter is a gyro rocket that is fired, pierces through thick armor, and then explodes. You can see this in the animation that just came out for 40K, which is the most practical version of it. It's like a small grenade. This thing is like shooting a football at somebody at relatively fast speeds, but not like impossible speeds. It fires about the same speed as an RPG.
Yeah, it's like, I think what we figured out was roughly around the velocity of a 40mm grenade, which means you'd see it travel, but it's still too fast for you to dodge.
Yeah, and this thing is birding them out pretty quickly.
What was that verb?
Birding.
Birding. B-R-R-R-T, right?
Yep. The more R's you add, the more it's shooting.
That makes sense.
Yep. And then it has its anti-tank weapon on top, which can sway around about, I think it can actually sway more than 180 degrees.
Yeah, well, on the models at least, you can turn the little las cannons like fully around.
We have a picture of it from the top view right here.
Yeah. So the little las cannon mounting systems can go the whole way around. The heavy bolters, they can only travel to the left and right slightly. But a Baneblade would not, like any super large tank is going to fight in a combined arms engagement, which means there's going to be infantry units supporting it, It's probably going to have an artillery detachment way off in the distance supporting it as well. Because this thing, by and large, should act as your command and control center plus your biggest, heaviest gun, as far as like frontline conflicts go. Especially with, you know, your entire command suite with all the radios and all the auspexes and everything every single novel has highlighted and everything the introduction paragraph shows. Like this thing, it is super over-engineered, but in a good way, as opposed to the Leman Russ, which was super over-engineered in a bad way.
So are we saying that this tank is actually better than the Leman Russ?
I don't think anyone would argue that a Baneblade is better than a Leman Russ. Well, I think it also...
More realistic.
More realistic in theory. Like, the size and scope of it is what makes it kind of ridiculous. But if you, like, shrunk it down to decent-sized proportions, got rid of, like, the mythical weapons, this front-mounting, like, Demolisher siege gun, and it was essentially just main battle gun with maybe a porthole or two for anti-infantry fire, it would look a lot like something like Leopard 2, which is a German tank. Like, hell, even the silhouette at this point, because it is no longer the land-shipped style trapezoid, like, it clearly has, like, return tracks for everything. And, you know, it actually has, like, a noticeable, like, height difference between the armor skirt and the wheels itself, so it can actually
travel.
It can actually travel.
Unlike the Leman Russ.
Unlike the Leman Russ, and, you know, exterior fuel source, like the engine and everything, is in an entirely separate container. It's, yeah, I like it a lot better, but the size is what makes it a problem. Like, the size is the big stroke against this thing. Once you get the size down, and you can choose to not have sponsons on your Baneblades, like, that's an option. It's been in the rules for forever. You can have, what, 0, 2, or 4 on a Baneblade. So, yeah, I'd give this one a passing grade as far as, like, could be realistic. Like, the main armaments and everything, the armor, it's the same problems we have with the Leman Russ of these numbers don't mean anything.
So, interesting enough, the next book, not book 3, but book 4, goes into where the positioning of the armor is.
Yeah, and that's a huge step in the right direction. So, eventually, we'll get around to that one and be able to show what does and does not make sense. Because if the front armor plating of this turret is 220 millimeters, sure, yeah, why not? If the back part is,
that seems like a waste.
It seems like a bit much.
So let's talk about the weapon now. The main gun, the Baneblade cannon.
Yeah, a rocket-propelled shell, essentially a massive artillery shell, fired with a secondary rocket engine. Crazier things have been made, but not many. Having a shell that is so large it requires a secondary, like, fuel source to fire it, I don't want to imagine what the inside, like, bracing for the chamber of this thing would have to be.
Well, it looks
to
like
make that work.
It looks like it's a multi-part cannon, so it's going to fold in on itself.
Yeah.
Like we said in the last video.
Yeah, so it'll get a little bit of extra speed for that. The question is since we know it's a rocket-powered shell or a standard battle cannon shell, somehow, I would like to know just where that fires off. Does the round get fired out to here and then the rocket takes it the rest of the way? Does the rocket fire the entire time? And that's just a mechanical question I'd have.
With the bolter, we know that the rocket shoots out at least a few inches and then takes off.
Yeah. So if it has like that, then that's kind of cool. We see things like that in a lot of different munitions right now, where they'll have a little kicker charge just to get the round separated from it, and then they'll fire off. And those are like strictly rockets. Gone are the days of like the Russian rocket truck where it fires like 40-something rockets and they're firing the entire time. So there's a massive cloud of smoke and flames and no one can be behind the vehicle when it fires. A lot of our munitions are what we call recoilless, which just means they eject as much energy out the back as is equatable to the round leaving the front, so that it doesn't kick the entire weapon system up. Like the Carl Gustav, the RPG-7, the AT-4, like shoulder-fired rocket. So yeah, like, it's not the weirdest thing I've ever heard of, and it's a really cool concept. It would mean you would get a bigger round out the front. It's just hyper-specialized at that point.
Yeah.
And hyper-specialized munitions are never a good thing. Because if a Baneblade runs out of its main ammo, where is it getting replacements?
Yeah, because you're not exactly just calling that in,
Yeah.
especially when that main replacement is from Mars.
Yeah, from Mars or from some other like super specific Forge world, and yeah.
That's how far down this cannon can angle itself.
Yeah,
which
well-
they declared as a -2 to 28, but I don't see it.
Yeah, -2 degrees of lowering on its elevation track. So that's whenever you see a measurement like this, -2 to +28. Like I said last time, that's always from it at its normal resting position, parallel to the horizon. If it goes -2, right, and we said the height of this thing was 20 some odd feet. Mm-hmm. This thing is not engaging infantry-sized targets with this gun within a football field's distance. Granted, you have a bunch of other guns for it, but just the fact that you are so big, so tall, and such a big like profile, I just
Also-
have huge problems with your main weapon not being able to be used in your own defense.
Also, its coaxial autocannon, which is its secondary armament on the main pintle, is at the same degrees.
Yeah,
So this thing also can't be used as an infantry fighting or light tank fighting or anything unless
Not-
they're a football
yeah.
field away.
yeah, not in short ranges, and the coaxial autocannon being attached to the big gun, like you do see coaxial machine guns as a feature in like a lot of tanks. However, when we think about how big these rounds are, like these are man-sized shells you're lobbing almost.
Yep.
I have issue with anything that you want to shoot with this. I don't think the autocannon is going to help you.
No.
And vice versa. If the autocannon is shooting at it, the main gun is overkill.
Yep.
So yeah, that's just personal opinion on that one. But again, we weren't given any dimensions on the size of the shell. So if we had those, we could do some really fun and crazy math. I know those
So-
words don't make sense, but
The only way I see this thing, because even this gun up here, which can fold down just a little bit, is limited by its gargantuan gun counterpart. Unless it spins off to the side.
like the pintle mounted, yeah, like a pintle mount, like what is it? Stormbolter is usually the one that is gone for in Imperial vehicles. This could probably help clear away things that are a little too close for you, but you're going to run into problems if anything gets behind you, because even if it pintle mounts, it cannot target anything immediately adjacent to it.
So this thing's going to have to rotate and use these heavy bolters to deal with it.
Yeah, or count on supporting infantry auxilia, or there are documented cases where tanks have called in artillery at what is called danger close. That's the area at which an explosion, shrapnel, or concussive wave could actually damage you. I could see a Baneblade potentially calling in artillery strike near to it, enough to where that clears out enemies as it tries to slowly wander itself away. But
And with its thick armor, this thing might actually be able to just call an artillery strike near it and survive
yeah,
unharmed.
it's a thick boy, and since it would know the munition sizes of things that are supporting it, there would be an entire conference before a battle ever began where everyone meets all the other officers of all the other units operating in the same area, and you brief your portion of it.
Now, anybody who's going to point out and say that actually they don't do this in 40K because it's all secretive, read the Baneblade novel. Every single person inside the Baneblade knows exactly how the Baneblade functions.
Yeah. It makes no sense for anybody to not know how a certain portion of a weapon system works. Like, if you are in a vehicle, you learn every bit of that vehicle, because it doesn't matter if you're a loader. If your gunner dies, congrats,
You're the gunner.
You have been promoted. You
Yeah.
now have his job and your job. If
Now-
the commander dies, like, the gunner of the main gun becomes the commander in most tanks.
And what we see in Space Marine, for instance, when the artillery is dead, they ask for a tech priest to repair it. It isn't because they themselves can't do field repairs. In fact, field repairs and ramshackle are rules in 40K right now, which are normal humans fixing their vehicles. But the tech priest can actually repair all of the vehicle, including its base functions and making sure its machine spirit is, okay.
Yeah. And that's a
Because
thing.
these are emotional tanks.
They have
You hurt
feelings.
their feelings.
They have their own issues they're working with.
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, and that's something you see in the real world as well. There's different levels of maintenance. There's 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. 10 is what is called operator level. So if you handle it, you can do all the level 10 maintenance on something. Like, is it, swap out like the entire gun system? No, that would be like a 20 or 30 level. That's a designated specialist technician can
So
do
that
those
would be
jobs.
like an engineer, a tech priest engineer.
Yeah, and then like 40 levels, you don't see 40 levels often in the military. It's a pyramid of maintenance workers, and a 40 sits at the very top. And
So it'd be like a Magus.
he is the guy who can make this thing out of scrap metal. Like, they are geniuses when it comes to the weapons they work on. And that applies to vehicles as well. So shout out to all my motor pool boys who, like, they see some crazy stuff. Like, I have seen in my own motor pool, we had a vehicle roll over, get entirely essentially scrapped, and it took them about 6 to 8 months, but they replaced the whole thing from like head to toe. Any like salvageable part was salvaged. Like, there's always somebody who's better and more specialized at your job than you are in the military, and that is something that not really very many people get a good grasp on. It's why you always keep your support staff happy.
Yep. Now, if I were to run this vehicle, if I were to actually make this vehicle, given 40K's technology and everything, and their limitations and their their crazy sci-fi weapons,
Yeah.
I would actually keep the las cannons because they're really good. I'd put this as a las cannon because if this thing's shooting it, a las cannon can definitely kill it.
Yeah.
I would replace the heavy bolters with multi-lasers. They're a bit weaker, but their ammunition is a lot easier to transport and have on hand. It also can be recharged by putting the ammunition cells on top of the vehicle
Yep.
and just letting it refuel from sunlight. That is an actual thing, by the way.
Yeah, you could even throw those batteries into campfires and recharge them.
Yep. The main battle cannon, or the secondary battle cannon here, the demolisher cannon, I don't know how they would make this fully functioning. Like, because anything this thing is shooting at, this thing would also be shooting at.
Yeah, and if you're splitting your weapons, it means you're turning the turret off its axis. I've never liked the demolisher cannon being on the front.
Now, there is one thing that I do want to bring up. The demolisher cannon can be used to, like, clear a building, and then this thing can be used to kill all the occupants.
Yeah, which is tomato, by and large.
It would just be...
The only adjustment I would make is like these anti-infantry weapons that we have on the sides, like the sponsons and everything. If I was allowed any 40K piece of like wizardry or tech science, whatever you want to call it, I would 100% put like heavy flamethrowers on the sides of this thing.
You can actually put heavy flamers on it.
When did that happen?
It's an upgrade right now.
Oh, okay. See, I don't play Astra Militarum. I played Imperial Guard, madam.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, that would be like my one change. Dedicate the side sponsons to anti-infantry work at close ranges that can't be covered by these big, massive guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can kill things at range with the big guns all you like. All the support weapons should be dedicated to keeping people off the vehicle.
So overall, the Baneblade,
If it was smaller, it would 100% pass, but this is 40K. We have no idea what kind of power generation it has, but I would give it a pass.
now before anybody says that this is based off of a tractor, which I did look into. I looked into that whole theory and everything that it's a tractor engine. That comes from a White Dwarf, from all I could see, and it's not a GW affiliate talking about it. It's actually an ArmorCast article from way back in the day.
Oh man, that is old.
Yeah. So, no, this thing is not a tractor as far as I can see. If you can find the source that says that this thing has a tractor engine, or any of the Imperial vehicles have tractor engines, I really want to find that source. Because I've seen it on Reddit. A lot of people accept it as canon lore, but it isn't. It's kind of like how everybody sees the Salamanders as canonically the good guys when they had the most destroyer squads, which would irradiate and burn an entire planet to the ground.
Yeah, we don't bring that up though. It's all about PR.
I know, right? So there's minor differences between these two. 6,000 tons to be exact.
6,000 pounds, 3 tons.
3 tons, sorry, my bad.
And it's the difference between which Forge World it came from, as far as we were able to tell. Like one comes from Lucius, one comes from Mars, and even like looking at them, it's just longer barrel, shorter barrel. Still have the autocannons, still have the las cannons, still have the heavy bolters. So much of it is the same, but there are just like slight little differences, like the armor on certain portions. But again,
we don't know what that
doesn't
is.
mean anything until we know what it means.
We know that it is ceramite and plate steel, which we do know can survive atmospheric re-entry, which I need to look up atmospheric re-entry's temperature. I believe it to be 1600 degrees.
It is hot.
Yeah.
I will go down on the record as saying if you're falling through the atmosphere, it gets hot. Then it gets cold again, and then it gets hot again. But yeah, there's lots of different types of armor in the real world. So finding out what kind of compositions these would all be would be fantastic. Because that could give us a real sense of what a contemporary analog would be.
Oh, so it's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
3,000 degrees. Yeah, that'll work.
So we do know that a las cannon can punch through plate steel, can punch through ceramite, so we do know that the las cannon and plasma are much hotter than that. We do know the temperature of the plasma guns that'll burn right through this tank.
Yep, so we have a ceiling, now we just need a floor.
Yep.
Because even, like I was saying, in modern day, you can have things like rolled homogeneous steel, which is essentially just steel plates that are constantly rolled and flattened, rolled and flattened, rolled and flattened, and those are used to make armor panels. The British have a composite armor system, which is layers of ceramic and steel layered on top of each other. There's reactive armors that will detonate outwards when they're damaged by a heavy enough hit. So there's all sorts of different things it could be, but again, these numbers just tell us nothing.
Yep. Well, we do agree on a few things about this design. One, has a good suspension.
Yeah, it has a shockingly good suspension, which
Shockingly.
don't do this.
Anyway, we do know that unlike most 40k tanks, its treads actually go back around on the bottom, which makes it so much better.
So much better on so many design points.
We agreed that this door is actually pretty good.
Yeah, like that's a great door for loading and unloading things. The handles I'm not so sure about being on the exterior. Like you may as well just have only interior handles at that point, just to be safe.
Yeah, because otherwise an orc is running up to that and just pulling it open.
Yeah, like
Or a velociraptor.
a lot of military vehicles do have Dunbar locks. So essentially, it's a lock that is inside to where you flip a latch into place, and it locks the entire mechanism from opening. So I would hope that that's on the inside, but I have never been inside of a Baneblade, and thus cannot speak to whether or not they have that system.
I wonder if they can manually rotate this barrel.
I doubt it. That is the mechanical advantage you would need to hand crank this thing around is utterly ridiculous, and now I'm going to have to sit down and do the math on it. So thank you for that, Alexis.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's also cool that it has like a slight vision port at the back.
Yeah, I think that's a hatch for accessing like the engine compartment and everything if you need to get to it from some other portion of the tank. But who knows? Who knows?
So, gauging by...
Camouflage.
God, I love the camouflage. Also, I just saw like another lore YouTuber say that Space Marines don't use camouflage, and I'm like, Corvus armor can go invisible. Suspensors stop, stummers stop the sound of a Space Marine walking. Camo cloaks hide them completely.
Yeah, the Raptor's entire chapter is based around being sensical about your camouflage pattern.
Yeah. But I saw a YouTuber say that, and I'm like, this is why I don't like lore YouTubers. Because they don't read.
But you're a lore YouTuber, Alexis.
I don't really do lore, ironically enough. Also here we see some of the older designs. Like this is funny because this is the older design for the Baneblade. This is just after Armor Cast. Like this is before the newer design Baneblade.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there was one additional Baneblade after this pre-GW. Oh yeah, we can also see the company headquarters and how the squadrons are laid out.
Yeah, again, this is something we were talking about with the Lehman Russes, how they have a differentiation between them, because there's clearly your Titan Hunter, Shadow Sword, and then your 2 standard frontline Baneblades, and then another Baneblade that is the command vehicle, which would have just better communications equipment and the most experienced guys on it.
To be honest, I think a normal Baneblade would probably knock out a Titan by shooting it in the knee.
Yeah, Void Shield, though.
I know, that's why you use the Demolisher
Space
cannon.
magic.
See? You have the Demolisher cannon to get rid of that. So here we see a bunch of other pictures of it, which are pretty good photoshops, and I like them.
Yeah.
We also see a vehicle that didn't exist for quite some time in this picture.
Oh, is that the little... I can barely tell what that is.
So, top...
Yeah, it's not even listed in there. I can't even recognize it from
That's
this
the
distance.
artillery tank. The one that folds open.
Oh, yeah, before the, what are they? The Griffins and the Wyverns and all that, before those were a thing.
Yeah, it's the super heavy variant of it.
Yeah.
Well, not super heavy, but a heavier version of it. So, as we go through, we see how Baneblades respond on the battlefield themselves.
Against Tyranids.
Now,
by
in
the
a
looks of that.
Tyranid world, that would actually be interesting because all the ground would be dried up.
It would be like flat, hard bedrock. I've been playing a lot of Gladius the last 3 days as the Tyranids.
Yeah.
So the idea of it all just being compressed stone, that may actually work in a Baneblade's favor because there's nothing for it to sink into at that point.
Yeah.
If it's all stripped down to just bare rock and stone, like standard rock is actually surprisingly durable and it handles compression really, really well. Like the stuff that makes its way all the way up onto the surface, some of that is compressible, but things like granite, like it could potentially like carry a Baneblade's weight. At like crazy speeds, I don't know.
So here we see the Baneblade's armor. We know that it's positioned as 14, 13, 12. So 14 in the front, 12 on the side, 13 on the side, and the rear is 12.
Yep.
It is a war machine. Its speed is lumbering, so even they acknowledge that it is not a fast vehicle. That is my phone. I do apologize about that. We know that the strength of this cannon is the same strength as a las cannon.
Yep.
But this one fires a much larger blast template. So
strictly better in every way.
Yep.
Except, what was it? The old rules for firing a blast template, if you were shooken, you couldn't.
yeah.
But I think Baneblades couldn't be affected by that because they were super heavies.
Yep.
Yeah. -1 leadership to tank shocks if you're tank shocked by a Baneblade.
Yep.
Yeah, that used to be an old rule. Grab your local old-timey gamer and have him explain tank shock to you and see if it makes sense to you.
Oh yeah. No, and also have them explain the vending machine thing of tanks where you just shake them and the tank can't do anything the entire game.
Oh yeah. Just kick it a little bit.
Yep. Difficult terrain. The Baneblade can ignore low walls, hedges, bushes, and rubble. It's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah.
Just crushes it.
Why would it?
So, do you want to go ahead and read this part?
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be the Shadow Sword. So this is our Titan Hunter variant.
Which is a very good novel, by the way.
I never got around to it, to be perfectly honest, and I am ashamed.
It is really good because it has a mixed regiment inside it, so you get to hear the different cultures and everything.
Yeah.
So you have a Valhallan in there telling you that the machine spirit isn't real.
Yeah, while he's drinking his tea and whatnot.
Yep.
All right, in history and honor, the Shadow Sword stands proudly alongside the Baneblade. As long as there has been the Baneblade, there has also been its sister, the Shadow Sword. Like the Baneblade, the Shadow Sword uses STC technology, and its production is limited to a few privileged Forge worlds, but counterfeit. Shadow Swords are produced on other Forge worlds. These vehicles lack the original Shadow Sword's advanced technology, and it may be gunned with a different main weapon. Large plasma cannons, turbo lasers, or huge battle cannons are not unknown. The remote-controlled sponson weapons are replaced by crude versions. Targeting equipment and Logis engines are more primitive, and the capacitors or engines are less efficient. Interesting little bit right there.
Okay, so that tells us that these side guns on both of these vehicles, because they are the originals.
Yep, they can be slave to the machine spirit.
Yeah.
Which
Also, I do want to point out I did make a mistake. I thought this one was a knockoff off of the Baneblade, so that was my problem. Oopsie daisy, my bad.
But yeah, no, having the machine spirit being able to run your side sponson anti-infantry guns would actually be of huge benefit because it limits the amount of crew that you have in the vehicle, which fewer crew tends to let a vehicle run more efficiently by and large. And you can actually just focus on controlling the main gun and not have to worry about what's going on the side sponsons.
Now with the Shadow Sword, we do know that its gun is locked forward.
Yes, it is locked forward. It is able to elevate and de-elevate very, very slightly, if I remember correctly. But then again, you're shooting at things that are giant skyscraper-sized monstrosities, so usually not an issue.
Yeah, so this tank today would be very interesting because it would have no purpose.
In a modern world, the Shadow Sword serves no purpose other than that mountain range offends me.
You see that mountain range? Yes, I want to see it.
I want to see the view on the other side, but I don't want to move. Can you make that happen? All right, so true Shadow Swords are armed with a volcano cannon, a huge laser powered by capacitors which draw power directly from the tank's engines.
Ugh.
The generator and capacitors need constant supervision, and each Shadow Sword is crewed by an engineer, sometimes a member of the Adeptus Mechanicus, sometimes a highly trained specialist from the Imperial Guard.
There we go.
Yep, there's your level 10 maintenance. Some people get trained up to do weird odd jobs. And this guardsman, his job is to control the power flow from the engine through the generator, as well as keeping the tank running. So all the responsibility, probably the least paid guy. To draw power, the engine seer must disconnect the engine's main drive and connect the generator in its place. The power is then transferred to the capacitors, which hold the titanic energies required for the volcano cannon.
Okay.
So yeah.
That's a kind of a major issue. This thing can't move and fire.
And not only can it not move and fire, you need to manually connect like power connections in order to start charging it. Then it can fire, and then you must disconnect the gun, reconnect the power to the engine system, and then you can start moving it.
One benefit that it has is this gun is firing at the speed of light because it is a laser.
Yes, it is firing at the speed of light. The volcano cannon, this is the baby version of the ones that we would later see show up in the Adeptus Titanicus games and on the Forge World Reaver and Warlord models, if you're crazy enough to buy one.
Yep, which I have one.
I used to have a lot. So anyways, yeah, that's a huge, massive negative to not be able to reposition, especially when you consider what this thing is supposed to be a prey.
Also can't turn while trying to aim.
Nope.
It has to wait for its target to stop moving to shoot it. Or predict its, with its logic engines, it can probably predict the path that it's going to go.
Yeah, it's still, that is one of those things where, considering what it's supposed to be hunting, being static is probably not a good thing, especially since you're going to get one shot, and then
it's probably going to bounce off of a void shield.
Yeah, if you're not lucky. Which we get to the next bit, which goes into its role. The Shadow Sword was developed as a Titan killer. Its massive gun is a Titan weapon and is capable of severing a Titan's arm or leg, so shoot it in the knee.
Yep.
For this reason, Shadow Swords are only made on Forge Worlds which raise Titan legions, and they're deployed to support Imperial Guard regiments, which are likely to be faced with enemy Titans. So, if you know that you're going up against Chaos, if you know you're going to see the Legio Mortis Titans, you get a Shadow Sword.
Here you go. Hope for the best.
Yeah, otherwise it's, oh, we have reports of a Hierophant in this battle space. Okay, we'll send a Shadow Sword there. We have reports of a Gargant. Okay, we'll send a Shadow Sword there. And this is more of that loaning out of specialty equipment and weapons and vehicles I was talking about earlier. Like, your Guard Regiment will not have a Shadow Sword forever. If it does, that means your Guard Regiment is always fighting Titans. And at that point, why do you not just have Titans?
Yeah. One other thing that we need to point out is this thing would be a little bit ineffective against the Warhound, as the Warhound can run, but it would be very effective against the bigger variants. So, such as the Reaver, the Warlord, the Imperator,
Yep.
The Psi Titan, which is also another Imperator.
Yep, the Nemesis Warbringer.
Yep,
Yeah.
Warbringer.
So there's lots of things it can shoot at.
It can also shoot at the Imperial Knights, but it's not hitting a regular knight. It's not hitting the Cerastus Knights. But it could be used against the Porphyron.
Yep.
It could be used against the two bigger ones. What are they? The one with the
Porphyron is the ball with legs and giant guns.
yeah, it's the punch buggy on legs.
The comments are screaming right now.
I know, it's so good. But the one with the melta weapon and the cannon.
Yeah.
And the other one with the Ursus Claw, which is not the Ursus Claw, but it's definitely an Ursus Claw. And the flamethrowers.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the name of them.
The Archaon?
Out of nowhere?
I think that's what it's called.
No, that's a Cerastus Knight Archaon.
Okay, there we go.
See, I know the Forge World Knights really well because I did voice acting for them for Ultimate Apocalypse.
I have at least one box of every knight that Forge World has ever made for Adeptus Titanicus, and I'm just drawing a blank.
All right, let's just
Anyways, let's finish this one out. Just as with its sisters, each Shadow Sword constructed and consecrated on those Forge Worlds that have the original STC is logged and registered with Mars, given its own identity, number, and name, and often painted on the vehicle by its crew. Its whereabouts, the war zones it has fought in, the crew roster, and all the other histories are reported regularly to the originating Forge World, so that the fate of each and every Shadow Sword might be known.
Pretty standard.
Yep, same block of text minus like one or two words. So yeah, the concept of a super heavy killer, like a bunker busting style weapon on a giant tank, is not something we have in the real world because that threat does not exist.
I think the closest comparison is a tank hunter.
Yeah, this would be a tank hunter on steroids. There was a Third Reich military project where they were building a massive tank called the Rat.
And the Gustav Max.
And the Gustav Max, the railgun, not an actual railgun, it was on rails before
This
someone
thing
yells.
could also shoot a battleship.
Yeah, it could. This could be like a massive Yamato-style like gun turret essentially slapped onto a tank chassis. In the real world, does it have a purpose? No, but that's because the threat doesn't exist that it's made to counter. Anything this gun fires at is surely dead. And everything on the other side of the building this thing fired at is probably dead. Or, flash, what is it? I can't think of the word.
Just instantly vaporized.
Thank you.
Because a lasgun, a laser-based heat weapon, does vaporize. The
Yeah.
scariest thing is how when a lasgun hits flesh, it boils everything until it vaporizes instantly inside the body. So when you get hit with a lasgun, it does cauterize the wound, but it also explodes.
Yeah, just heat is an incredibly powerful factor in laser and plasma weapons that isn't often looked at. There's a fantastic non-40K novel called Forever War. It is a classic 1960s, 70s military sci-fi. And in it, there's a scene where they're in their power armor, they lay down on this asteroid that's been flying in the void of space, and their heat exchange vent touches the ground that is supercooled by the void of space, sublimates, explodes, and kills the guy.
That's actually really cool.
It's really cool. And sublimation of materials is something that happens all the time when you're talking about high heat. When nuclear weapons were first used, there are zones of destruction at which things you'll survive, but you are on fire just from the radiant energy and light being thrown out by that
and
detonation.
assuming you survive the shockwave.
Assuming you survive the shockwave, which will hit in a few seconds, you have a very miserable moment waiting for that, as your entire body just is instantly on fire. A gun like this is going to have that effect.
Yeah, this thing is literally firing the sun at you.
Yeah, it's like we said last time. If you can shoot the sun at somebody, shoot the sun at somebody. It's a powerful weapon. We know from the cross section that there are venting tubes here at the end, just in case something goes wrong with the entire weapon system itself. It's not feeding back in. That's why the Shadow Sun's never had, or the Shadow Sword, not Shadow Sun, she's a Tau. The Shadow Sword has never had a rule where this will cataclysmically fail and kill everyone inside the vehicle, like we see with plasma weapons in the rest of the Imperium's roster.
Now, funny that you bring that up, and I don't want to spoil a book for you.
Oh no.
But that whole thing
But that
is actually
happens. Yeah.
in the book.
That doesn't shock me.
But it's because the cannon gets damaged.
Sure, yeah.
Because once the cannon was fired too many times, it started melting its entire barrel.
Spoiler warning.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But that
It's
does
an
make
audio
sense.
drama, so it's great no matter what.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's not as good as Prophecy of the Wa, but still.
Yeah, Prophecy of the Law is great. But, so stat-wise, like we saw with its brother. Brother?
Sister.
Yeah, because this is the sister, so that's the brother?
Well, it said sister to the Baneblade itself.
They're both girls.
Yes.
We'll just go with that, yeah. I mean, big ships get named female names anyways, so we'll assume that for Baneblades too.
We'll ship it.
Yeah, we'll ship it. This is Broomhilda.
So-
I imagine as far as like size go, they're fairly close.
Interesting enough, the Shadow Sword is much smaller. Not much smaller, but its height compared to the other one. The height of the Baneblade is 27.5. The height of this is 20.6.
Yeah, and there's a good reason for that. And this is a casement and not a turret.
Yep.
So there is no mechanism inside for this to rotate, but it doesn't have to. So you're able to build a much shorter profile vehicle during
so you're
that time.
telling me there's no hand crank inside this one?
If there is, it's just to torture somebody who messed up. Just turn the crank until I'm tired would probably be the statement.
It is the same speed as the Baneblade itself, and it is the same length. The only thing different is the width, actually. No, wait, nope, same width, everything. It's copy-pasted.
Yep, more of the same. Speeds are about the same too, 25 kilometers an hour and 18. So yeah, and it is important to note that the elevation on this gun is only 12 degrees. So like we said, it's not going far. Like this front resting portion, we have seen that used quite often actually in like obnoxiously long barreled guns or exceptionally heavy barreled guns, because it just helps rest it as it's traveling. Once this thing would actually start engaging in combat, this would probably be pulled away so that it could freely elevate and lower itself as needed.
Yep. Now, before we go any further, we did actually forget a few things. We do need to talk about the armor itself.
Oh yeah.
There is a large flat section in front of this vehicle.
Yep.
There is a flat section right here, curved section here, flat here, and then curved again.
Yep.
So some of its curves work, others...
It's taking a shell straight.
And if it takes a shell straight to its door...
Yeah, we can imagine that the door is probably thinner than everything around it, just because it's a door and thus has to be moved. So yeah, we run into that whole issue that we ran into with the Leman Russ of you're offering large flat sections to an enemy. If this isn't spaced armor or something like that, where there's an actual gap inside, that's just letting a round travel through.
Yep. But as we said before, unlike the Leman Russ, which is operating solo, or in a group of Leman Russes, this thing is going to have infantry and everything around it to try to protect it.
Yeah, and we actually get to see some infantry out in the front of the tank. I would never, never be anywhere near the front of this thing, though.
No, I wouldn't even be like here. I'd be like...
This guy is right in front of that tank tread. If the driver's not paying attention, that man is dead.
Yep.
If that thing fires, all these guys are blind. If not, instantly caught on fire.
So its main ammunition is unlimited. So we know that its system inside it is probably nuclear powered.
It's the multi-fuel, so it burns whatever it burns at some crazy amount of efficiency.
Well, because if this thing's firing a laser,
Yep.
or just going based off of the logic of the las guns and las
We
cannons,
have this over here, yeah.
if this thing's firing a laser that's pulling from the engine itself, that engine must be using plasma, which is superheating things, nuclear energy and everything.
Yeah. It is using something insane.
Yeah, so for this gun to be able to shoot that far and that hard as it does, that means that this engine has that output.
Yep.
So that means the Baneblade itself should be a lot faster.
Yeah, you could probably power a small town off of the power generators on these things for just the sheer amount of energy you would need to generate a massive bolt of energy that can kill something at range, to move this thing around, to power all the internal systems. Like, granted, it can only fire the big gun or move at one time, but that's still a massive amount of energy that we're talking about.
Yeah. And there's this, is that the on-off switch?
20. Transmission override controls.
Oh, that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. And then this tiny little box is the electrical generator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's the big old switch for connecting and disconnecting the transmission system that we were talking about. So there's one sad little man back here just flicking that switch every time they have to get ready to fire. That's his whole job, that and making sure the whole thing works. But if we look over here, we see like the thickness of some of this armor, like see how super thin it is underneath the gun casement itself.
Mm-hmm. But see how thick it is in the front.
Yeah, so that like front area we all had trouble with, like, yeah, that's a solid chunk of armor if this is all to scale and everything. But again, it shows how the armor figures were given, the 220 millimeters, doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, because that's probably here, but this is much thinner. Over here is way thin.
Yeah.
Even in the back, it's super thin.
Yeah, and let's not even talk about the floor. Like, a mine is apparently this thing's worst enemy.
Yeah, and it's going to, actually, it might trigger the mines like way ahead of it with the amount of pressure this thing's putting on the ground.
Yeah, if you want to see a crazy modern military vehicle that I think is the most 40K thing in the world, look up just standard mine detonation vehicles. There's one that uses essentially a combine harvester's rotary, but with chains with steel balls at the end of it, and it spins it at speed and then just digs up the ground and lets the mines explode.
That's amazing.
It is the most metal thing ever.
Okay. So we were just talking off camera about how this thing, if they put that engine in something else, they could probably get it to move like really fast.
It's just lightning quick. And I actually think for as heavily armored as this thing is, which is all cool and everything, we see fortifications like the Primaris Redoubt from Fort World, where this gun is attached to a massive bunker system.
Which seems to be more efficient.
Yeah, it would make a little bit more sense, because again, this thing's not catching a Warhound, it's not catching a Reaver, this is like an ambush style weapon. And then it's firing one shot, hoping to the Emperor that it hits, kills the enemy Titan.
And the Void Shield doesn't stop it.
And the Void Shield doesn't stop it, and then it's all about how fast can that engineer flip the switch in the back, get the engine going again, and this thing run away.
Yep. Which again, you can read all about that in Shadow Sword. So, let's get to this thing's stats really quickly. Oh, the old Shadow Sword. Look at how cute it was. With its simplicity.
I love they bothered putting searchlights on top of them.
Yeah. Alright, so this thing is strength 10, so its cannon is a lot stronger than a las cannon. Who would have guessed? AP of 2, which is interesting. Las cannons are also AP 2, so this thing's a super las cannon.
Yep.
Ordnance 1 blast Titan killer.
Yep, and that was essentially, instead of losing one structure point, you could roll and it would be D3 structure points lost.
Yep, D3 structure points.
Yep, and if you killed it, you automatically rolled on the catastrophic damage table, which old 40K vehicle rules, especially around 5th and 6th edition, it was table after table after table.
Yeah.
Of all the things you had to roll just to see if you did any damage. But something that's really interesting about the Volcano Cannon is its just sheer range of 120. Like, I would like to fire at that table over there.
And that's where I think this thing really shines, is this thing would sit and wait for days for the Titan to come lumbering into position and then blast it.
Yep. Yeah, and you would see that used in the actual Apocalypse games. I think the Shadow Sword, you wouldn't ever really take it in a standard game of 40K back in the day. Because yes, it will super kill one thing. But you have a lot of other things that can also just really kill one thing dead.
For its points,
Yeah, 535 points.
I think you can actually take the Baneblade, and the Baneblade is better in standard 40K at the time. Once I can find its stats. Oh, I need to go to its ending. Oh, the standard Baneblade is actually more points.
Yep.
That makes sense because there's more weapons.
Yeah, it's more weapons, was more useful.
Back in the day, obviously.
Yeah, the old system of structure points, like the nostalgia is really strong through all this.
Yeah, glance it 3 times and it dies.
Yeah, and the lumbering vehicle can only move 6 inches. It has to go straight forward, and then it gets to turn.
I'm glad they got rid of that.
Yeah.
So, next up, we have the Stormblade,
Yep.
the plasma variant.
Rise's pride and joy.
Oh, isn't it adorable?
He's so adorable. It's gonna kill its whole crew on accident.
Yeah, more than likely.
I love that the version they chose to use for this is a Deathcore of Krieg one.
Yeah, I mean, that's fitting.
I clearly don't care about our men at all. Put them in the Stormblade.
So you want to go ahead and read this part?
Here we go. Not every Forge World has access to the STC data required to manufacture true Shadow Swords, but many have sought to produce tanks that fulfill the same Titan Hunter role. Instead of the Volcano Cannon, these vehicles can mount turbo lasers, massive battle cannons, or adaptations of other Titan-sized weapons. In the case of the Stormblade, the Plasma Blast Gun is modified and mounted in a Shadow Sword chassis. First developed on Ryza, hey, I got it.
Nice.
It's an educated guess. It's plasma. It's probably from Ryza.
Yep.
The Stormblade represents a viable alternative to the Shadow Sword, and its combat record confirms this. Whilst the Stormblade lacks the most advanced features of the true Shadow Sword, including the long-range targeting devices and the redundant main generator and capacitors for the Volcano Cannon, but these are replaced by massive photonic fuel cells to power the plasma weaponry. Space created by the removal of the capacitors is taken up by the weapon's extensive cooling system. Much like its smaller cousin, the Executioner, the crew are protected by extra heat shielding, but the vehicle's larger size allows for a more efficient main cooling system, making the Stormblade a more reliable vehicle than the Executioner.
Okay, so at least they address the superheating of the plasma gun itself. They do talk about how they had to switch out the system, so this one's probably nuclear powered.
Yeah.
This one is probably slightly less nuclear powered?
Yeah, photonic, what was it? Photonic fuel cells?
I don't...
Whatever that is.
Let's see if that's an actual thing. I'm going to Google that real quick.
Well, photonic means it's light-based. So I'm going to go ahead and say no.
How the heck do you spell that?
So P-H-O-T-O-N-I-C. This shows you that Latin is not a dead language. People use it for weird names all the time.
Okay, so... if I can spell correctly. There we go.
I mean, photon gas, gas-like collection of photons in physics. So,
in other words, they have no idea.
so maybe this could also again be one of those things where a very cool article on bleeding edge technology got seen by the fluff writer and was like that.
Well, remember, the
That's
reason
not
that
science
Space
enough.
Marines can't be women, according to a 1988 White Dwarf, which was repeated in the Black Crusade book, word for word, states that Space Marines can't be women because of zygotes. When
Yep.
a zygote is
Yep.
an impregnated egg.
Yep. We don't think about things sometimes,
We don't.
just as a human race. All right. So yeah, essentially, like the plasma blast gun. For those of you who have seen like Warhound Titans in person, the actual like piece itself is almost the exact same kit.
Yeah.
To the point where I had a friend who decided that he wasn't going to pay Forge World prices for a Stormblade, so he got a miscast cannon from a Warhound arm and used that instead.
There you go.
Yeah, so he just threw like camo netting over it and it looked just fine. So yeah,
There you go.
there you go, conversion artists. There's a cheaper way to make a Stormblade. Get a eBay rescue Baneblade and a hobby knife and go ham.
There's a ton of them right now. They need rescuing in good homes. Remember, everyone, spay and neuter your Baneblades.
Adopt, don't shop. All right, the Lucius Pattern Hull, the same in design as the Storm Sword, so it's the exact same chassis system. Includes a hull-mounted heavy bolter and an armored housing on the right side of the superstructure for the vehicle's primary searchlight. So not only is there a blister for the searchlight, it's an armored housing for the
Oh
searchlight.
my god. And they have a separate power housing for it.
Of course they do.
Why?
But to compensate for the loss of long-range firepower, the sponson turrets both mount las cannons, adopting the fire control system from the Baneblade.
Okay, so this is the bastard child of both of them.
He took the best of both worlds, question mark?
Yeah, kind of actually, except
Yeah.
for the nuclear power system, and replaced it with, I have no idea, photon energy power system.
It's whatever Star Trek tricorders run off of, like whatever that power system is, clearly.
Yep.
A final identifying feature is the addition of bolted-on armor plates along the side and the superstructure.
Why?
Oh, more armor's more good, yeah? I don't know.
Of course. I guess that's where the rivet armor comes from.
Now, due to the relatively poor quality of ore, this has no additional protective value. Although the increase in weight adds extra strain to the engine and power transmission, in turn requiring extra maintenance time. On the battlefield, the Stormblade fulfills the same role as the Shadow Sword as a Titan Hunter. Lacking the awesome power of the Volcano Cannon, it...
I love that they're
The
just...
Stormblade must close to range to engage its preferred enemy, but to compensate for this, it is equipped with multiple heavy bolters for anti-infantry defense. To aid the tank when facing the heaviest Titans, some Stormblades were fitted with the external Hellion missile racks. These proved to be highly unreliable, being exposed to enemy fire and prone to sudden, catastrophic detonation of the missile warheads if damaged. After 3 Stormblades from the Phyresian 31st Heavy Tank Company were destroyed by their own missiles, the Helion racks were deemed too dangerous and withdrawn from service. So there's a lot to unpack there.
I love that the designer is just like, this tank is bad.
The best part is, it's like, this is the first one where it's like, oh yeah, no, this is a design that came up from somebody not Mars. It's from Ryza. It's garbage. Like okay, so the ore is really poor quality because it's built on Ryza, which, like, material-wise has not been very rich. They've expanded on this a lot in the new Adeptus Mechanicus codexes and the...
Isn't Ryza just mining from asteroids at this point?
It pretty much is. The new Defensive Ryza book just came out for Adeptus Titanicus, and that goes in deep into, like, the history of Ryza and why it became such a... I guess mecha is kind of the right word, of,
Yeah.
like, plasma research. It's because it was the only thing that you could do there that would get anyone interested in using the planet. Everything else was just subpar. So the fact that the plasma weaponry from Ryza is the best in the galaxy as far as the Imperium's concerned shows what they can't do. And what they can't do is build other things to other people's qualities. And this is, again, one of those things with, like, military contracts. Everyone wants to claim they can do the thing for cheaper. A tech priest from Ryza, a fabricator general, came up with this idea saying, hey, here's what we're going to do because we can't build a Shadow Sword. We're going to build this thing and we're going to claim it does better.
Now, that happens in real warfare, doesn't it?
It happens quite a bit. The lowest bidder is usually the one who gets the contract, so we end up with some really duds of weapon systems over the
Do
years.
you end up with a Helios rocket pack that blows up your entire tank convoy? Of super expensive,
I mean-
multiple ton tanks?
Like, we end up with things like Oshkosh is a manufacturer of tractors. They build a lot of military vehicles for some reason. There's actual reasons, but I don't want to go into them. But you end up with vehicles that need a lot of extra maintenance. They underperform as opposed to what they were promised to do. It's like, oh, you'll get 60,000 hours of operation time. But every 3 weeks, you need to spend 30 of those hours just doing maintenance.
Yeah.
And that's just to keep it, like, running. It's like, oh yeah, it has a heater in the back for all the troops. It pumps out poisonous gas when it's running, you know, like, there are little stories like this everywhere in the military. Like the F-35 strike fighter program, the Joint Strike Fighter program, sorry. Here in Arizona, that's been a big thing for our economy because we have Luke Air Force Base just down the road that way, for those of you watching. But it was supposed to be this like amazing, can do everything vehicle, and we just threw money at it, just nonstop. And the Stormblade echoes so many like little design tweaks and features that screamed to me like I was made strictly to see if we could get away with this.
I mean, if nothing else, it gives a morale boost.
Yeah, I do love that it has to close distance at the standard speed of a Baneblade, so
the Titan, which can move about 20 miles per hour, is
easily outpacing you.
Yep. So I think we're up to the last paragraph.
All done with that, yeah. The fact that you, like, having missiles on the back of a vehicle that is supposed to be hunting stuff, that can make sense. But there's a reason why in the modern military, missile systems are given to support units and not to frontline units. Missiles are expensive. They do have a tendency to have problems if they're not maintained properly. Like a rocket is easy. A rocket has a big old motor, it fires out and it blows up somewhere. A missile is supposed to be smart enough to guide itself to something.
So this is just them compensating for not having a navy as well.
Yeah, this is them sitting there. It's like, you know what? We can't build like manticores, so we'll throw a bunch of like missiles akin to a manticore missile on the back of this thing and hope that it works.
And it blew up their entire tank company.
Yeah, it blew up 3 of these. Like, that's just utter madness. I don't know if I have fought 3 Stormblades in my entire time of playing 40K.
I don't think I've ever fought one.
I have fought one at least once, but yeah, it's and yeah, it's more of the same. It's more like copy-paste stats. It is lighter than both of the previous variants.
Yeah, 310.
But it's also more lightly armored.
Yep, which we can see.
Yep.
And it is, I didn't actually do the stats for this one because I apparently forgot.
13.5, 8.4, 6.3. It's the exact same.
Yep.
Yeah, it has not changed. The speed is still the same. So this thing is supposed to chase Titans down because it can't shoot them from range.
And it's not going to do that.
It is not catching anybody. I do love that there is a little driver's hatch up at the front underneath the massive plasma coils. So your driver is instantly going to go blind when that thing fires. Like,
and get evaporated.
Yeah, though we do get to see that we have the Lucius and the Rhizoparans next to each other. And for those of you who splurged on some Forge World kits, you'll notice the actual like focusing beams and everything for the Rhiza pattern anything. Which is just a cool little design function that is hidden underneath all this armor plating that you get in standard plasma weaponry kits. It's very, very 30K-esque.
Yeah.
Very Death Star.
I do like that.
Yeah,
Better.
it's a really cool little thing.
So circumcised and uncircumcised. There you go. You're welcome.
There you go, kids. All right, camo. So here's
This thing is used on multiple worlds.
yeah, like they make them. It doesn't mean it's good, but it means somebody bought them.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare. It's such a nightmare.
That's strength 8 AP2, 54 inches, which is half of that.
That is less than half of the of the Shadow Sword, and that is what 2 feet less almost than
Yeah.
the standard Baneblade. And yeah, it's just
Hitting on
it's
fours.
such a dud.
Yeah.
It's 511 points, so it is the cheapest one. So this is your budget one, which makes sense when you look at everything. There was a cool detail that I didn't mention, but that I kind of like. The side armor that is bolted on, that's where the old resupply door was.
Oh my god.
Because you don't have to wheel in any big shells into this thing, because it's all energy based.
Yep. So they put a board over it.
Yeah, just put a sheet metal over it. It'll be fine. It's not low quality garbage or anything.
God.
To anyone who loves the Stormblade and Rhiza, like, I get it. It looks real cool. The fact that even in the fluff, it's like quantifiably the bad one is just
Yeah.
too good to pass up.
No, that really is. That really is. So let's get on to the siege version of this thing,
Yeah, the Storm Sword.
which I think all of these would be considered siege vehicles because they would pray that the opponent surrenders.
Yeah, this is the mobile bunkers are probably the closest definition I'd give to these things. Like they are going to be where the fight happens, but only because you're going to put them exactly where the fight is going to be.
Yeah.
You're never going to hope that it hunts somebody down. These things don't patrol. Like these things only go places with purpose and with a whole lot of extra support ahead of time.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to recon the roads just to make sure the roads are wide enough so that they can go down them.
Yep. And then on top of that, you have to make sure all the buildings next to it are clear, because otherwise somebody's just throwing a couple of pipe bombs on this thing and killing it.
Yeah, like especially since none of its guns can angle up very high. Like if you are in the ruins over here, you can fire on one of these things with like near impunity. Like no one can respond to you until somebody pops open a hatch and
Takes the storm bolter.
takes pot shots with you. But at that point, the tank's now open.
And you're killing it.
Yeah.
So that's a massive weakness of this tank, is once you're above it. So a freaking... And it has no anti-aircraft guns.
Yeah, that was something I'd noticed as well. Like even some of the Lehman Russes, they had a higher elevation angle on a lot of their guns than a lot of these do. Like this Stormblade, the Shadow Sword, those are both like 12 degrees of elevation.
So they're not turning and shooting anything.
They're not firing on anything. And that's why these things need so much support. Like these things are not winning battles on their own, but they are linchpins that you're going to build your battle plan around having. I still just, if anybody who does animations wants to animate a Stormblade chasing a Warhound
In circles.
just in circles, like I would adore that.
While the Warhound is just taking pot shots at it with the same weapon.
I'm fairly certain the Warhound of the time could back up faster than this thing could advance.
Oh my god. Alright. Let's get rid of the
Anyways.
garbage one.
Yeah,
Let's
moving
go on to
on.
the Storm Sword.
Moving on with our lives. Storm Sword was originally a Field Workshop conversion of the Shadow Sword. So Field Workshops, essentially if the Shadow Sword eventually failed because it's trash and was damaged, taken to a repair bay, but it's not a full-blown in the rear, like there's a factory next door building new parts, they're just making something out of nothing. That's what the Storm Sword is. So it happens. It happened a lot more in like near peer conflicts, so that's where both sides have about the same technology. You'd see that a lot in World War II, especially on the Eastern Front, where essentially there's no way to get a resupply in of like, oh, our tank's gun is down, what are we gonna do? Okay, well, we'll just rip it out, with some cabling and everything. We'll throw a new one in there. Oh, but it's the wrong caliber. That's fine.
We have to make do.
It's a gun. It is better than no gun. So that's the origin of this one. When a Shadow Sword or Stormblade is knocked out, the salvage chassis is rebuilt and new weapons are added to create the Storm Sword, as troops have christened it. It's never a good thing if your troops are naming something. This is common practice with other vehicles, such as the Thunderer and many unique variants of the Imperial Guard vehicles. While such conversions are unofficial and frowned upon by the conservative upper echelons of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Imperial Guard commanders facing the enemy on the ground must take a more pragmatic view. Any vehicles that can fulfill a battlefield role can and will be utilized.
You know what? That's fair.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a joke in the U.S. Army called Circle X. On a form that you have to fill out saying, it's like, oh, I've done this maintenance on this day, you sign your name on it. There's a little section that says, is this vehicle deadlined? Deadline essentially means that it's not safe for use or it's just not functional. And you just mark that down. An officer can say, hey, I'll take the heat if something goes wrong with this vehicle. And they can do what's called a Circle X and say that, hey, for the next 24 hours, this vehicle's good to go. But sir, the oil is coming out of the transmission and transmission fluid is coming out of the oil system. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it just needs to fire.
We need to do this. Like, there's no other option. It's like, oh, okay. So that's essentially what the Storm Sword is. It's a walking abomination.
I like how the the tanks just get worse and worse.
They started on a high note, that's for sure. Storm Sword Super Heavy Tank is built specifically for sieges and street fighting.
Hey, look at that, I got it right.
Look at that. Whilst the Shadow Sword excels at long range, and the Baneblade is an all-rounder, equally at home in open fields or in street fighting, the Storm Sword lends its weight and firepower to troops at close quarters.
Oh, that's dangerous.
More than a little bit. The main armament's restricted range leaves it dangerously exposed in open terrain, and most commanders will only commit them to battle in the environment they were built for, in the heart of a city fight where the fighting is at its most intense and fierce, leading the attack, crunching through the rubble and smashing through walls.
Okay, so we know that this thing is going to be used on roads and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So we know that the Imperial roads can hold these things.
Yeah, they damn well better. The fact that this is built for city fighting
Is heavily limited.
it's heavily limited, but the Storm Sword, it has some unique features we'll get to that let it help a little bit. Tanks in street-to-street fighting, I have seen a tank go through a little wall and pop up in a courtyard on the other side. I've seen a tank accidentally clip a house and tear down a wall. Like, they are used in street-to-street fighting.
All I can think about is Killdozer.
Killdozer is actually a great example of an armored vehicle in a civilian setting, because the Killdozer, for those who are not aware, it's a Netflix documentary now.
Yeah,
actually.
I know.
Yeah, I need to watch that. But a man essentially had a psychotic break a couple of years ago in Colorado, went crazy, took what was essentially a bulldozer and put concrete armor plating on it, and then welded himself inside. It was very tragic. Like, a lot of people got hurt. Man ended up killing himself. I don't believe there were any fatalities other than him.
No,
actually.
two
Or was
police
it?
officers.
Two police officers. There you go. But there's video online where this guy is driving the tank through buildings of people who he
more
felt had wronged him.
specifically, he's driving them through buildings that were federal.
Yeah, like federal and like city council members who had wronged him and things like that. It's a crazy story.
Yeah.
But that can illustrate the destructive power behind being heavy and being able to move, especially in any sort of environment. Here at Games U, we had a guy...
Carpedo.
Carpedo. Yeah, Carpedo, we lovingly call him. Was driving for like one of his first times, got frustrated, talking to his mom, and then put his car through the front plate glass windows of the building. Buildings are not meant to withstand direct contact with vehicles, let alone big, heavily armored ones.
Yep.
So that's actually, a really cool little note, thinking of this thing tearing through a wall. I may have to model a building with, a hole big enough for one to come through, just make it detachable. That would be real cool.
All I can think of is that scene from Fist of the North Star where he punches the building, it falls on top of him, and he just keeps walking.
Oh man, I totally forgot about Fist of the North Star. Oh man. Anyways, I was thinking more along the lines of T-34. Guy drives through a schoolhouse, and it is just a very fun little scene, which you don't get to say very often about World War II movies. Anyways, each massive siege cannon shell holds enough explosives to flatten a building with a single shot. Gunners are taught to aim at the ground floor of the building with the intention of causing the entire building above to collapse. So this gets around the, hey, someone's on the floors above us shooting down at us.
Screw him.
Yep, just bring the building down. The siege gun barrel has a restricted elevation, which reduces the weapon's maximum range, because if people didn't know this, bullets arc, they don't go flat out.
Lasers do, though.
Lasers do.
They're only limited by the curvature of the entire planet.
Yeah, gravity.
Yeah, who would've
Weird,
guessed?
right? But this is compensated for the shell's integral rocket propulsion system, so there's the rockets again. So you can get a shell to go a lot further if you strap a rocket to the back of it.
Who would have guessed?
No surprise there. The Storm Sword siege gun fires huge rocket-propelled siege shells, each weighing in excess of 180 kilograms.
Holy crap.
Rather than firing a shell by conventional means, it literally launches each shell. Exhaust vents on either side of the gun barrel allow the gas discharge by the rocket engine to escape during firing. The size of the shells limits the vehicle's ammunition racks to holding just 20 rounds. Due to the weight of each shell, the vehicle's loader is aided by an automated loading tray which is hand cranked to move a shell into the barrel. This is a time-consuming process, and the Storm Sword cannot maintain a high rate of fire. That is more detail that we've gotten about how one of these things fires than we've gotten in the rest of the book preceding it.
Yep.
So we got question 1 answered from the start of the video, like how does a rocket-propelled shell work in a Baneblade? We just got it lined out. So it does fire. There are vents in the barrel itself where the excess gas will vent out, but it is firing on a rocket motor the entire time.
All right, so now we know that.
We now also know that it's 180 kilograms.
For this particular shell.
For this particular shell, which that's 2 people almost.
Jeez.
So yeah, they're heavy, but that there is like an assisting, like loading.
All right, so the next page just goes over patterns and everything. Now, where have tank destroyers been fielded? Like, they're not fielded in urban, are they?
They can be, and often it's just wherever a tank battle is bound to happen. One of the more famous examples of tank battles is a Russian battle against the Germans in 1943, is the Battle of Kursk. It was the largest tank battle that ever happened in history. And so regiments of tanks were sent in. So we're talking hundreds of tanks per regiment and multiple regiments engaging in battle together.
So
And
when we hear Imperial Guard sending hundreds of tanks,
it is possible to happen. Like modern history has only ever really happened once. Like tanks are expensive, they're hard to maintain, and as we've seen with all the Lehman Russes, they're very, very slow.
yep.
Like, considering the Imperial Guard is supposed to conquer planets and continents,
Don't mind me just smacking my camera.
Arizona earthquake. Like moving 20 miles an hour means that you're not fast enough to take over any sort of area.
Well, with them, they have the benefit of Valkyries just picking up their vehicles.
Yeah, the heavy load lift Valkyries would be almost essential, like to how you would run a campaign, or like bulk landers and things like that. You know, something we don't see much on the tabletop because the tabletops are
Supposed to
microcosms of, you know, here's a conflict that's happening right now.
Yeah.
As opposed to the old battle plan, which is the order of battle, where your troops came on first with your fast attacks, and then your elites showed up,
Yep.
and then the heavy supports arrived. That's more accurate to a meeting engagement of modern militaries.
See, if 40K could find a way to make a turn last significantly quicker, I would definitely do full engagements like that.
Yeah.
Because that actually, it makes your fast attack have a point.
Yeah, there's a reason to take scout elements. Like even in the modern day, it's like the reason to take scout elements is because they find the enemy faster. And when you find the enemy, you're able to actually do things with it.
So we do have the, oh no, this is the tank hunter, but there is a pillbox here.
There's a pillbox there.
There's actually several, which I really like.
It is about the size of the tank.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, given the dimensions of the tank, like that's a heavily fortified pillbox. So yeah, that's like not a bad size for one.
Okay.
It again all depends, but usually there would be a retaining wall behind here to catch any bullets that happen to go through the opening, and then there would be a radio station and maybe like a little cot so that guards could rotate off, take naps and things like that. But yeah, you even see like a little armored bridge in the distance.
I like this setup.
Yeah, that's actually a really scary defensive line, because if the tank destroyer sees you, you're pretty much screwed, and the pillboxes can support the tank destroyer by taking on infantry.
Also,
So,
the pillboxes, if they have radios, are contacting the other tanks that are in the field.
letting them know, hey, we're getting overrun, we need support.
Now, the laser destroyer. 72 inches, strength 10, finally a weapon that's better than a las cannon.
Because it's a bigger las cannon.
It's a bigger las cannon. AP2 and ordnance, so it rerolls the damage.
Yep.
Which back in the day, there was 8 levels of the damage chart, depending on the addition. And AP1 and AP2, AP1 would add 2 to the damage table. AP2 would add 1 to the damage table. Ordnance meant you rolled 2 dice to pick
Took the highest, yep.
Took the highest for, in one edition was for penetrating armor, which is the one that it's more known in. In earlier editions, it was for the damage table itself.
Yep.
So yeah, this thing just took the best the best weapon on the Leman Russ,
Made it a little bit bigger.
and now kills tanks with it.
Yep, and does it very, very well.
Yep. So yeah, then we
Yeah,
have the
there you go.
Thunderer, which again is another tank that isn't in GW anymore.
Yep.
And the Thunderer is much the same.
Snub-nosed Stug.
This one is slower. Weighs less, it's 52 tons. So it's the same weight as the other one.
Yep. It is less armored, actually, on the hull. It's only got 150 millimeters of armor on the hull as opposed to the 180 we've seen on everything else.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Again, we only know, and just keep in mind this is based on, again, re-entry temperatures and things of that nature and knowing the heat of plasma, but now we only know what 3 of these Leman Russes actually fire.
Yep.
And that would be this one, the las cannon, and the executioner.
Yep.
We don't know what the other weapons
Yeah,
do.
we still, like, there's nothing saying other than it's like, oh, it's a demolisher cannon. Okay, what does
Demolisher
that
cannon.
mean? Like, is this I imagine it's a high explosion shell just because of how it worked in the game, but it is, if I remember right, these things had abysmally short range, and the blast was huge, and I remember on more than one occasion seeing the blast template scatter back onto these boys
I
and
remember
doming the tank itself.
I remember one game I played back in 4th edition. A Defiler shot a close target. The scatter came back to the Defiler, hit Abaddon and the Defiler, killing both.
Yep.
It's one of the most iconic moments back in the day.
That sounds about right.
But
yeah.
it looks like it only has 18 rounds, which
That would have to be a massive round, and once you're at that kind of size, there would have to be a crane apparatus in here to actually load the gun.
now we do see the crane apparatus
Yep.
in the recovery vehicle.
In the recovery vehicle, and on the Basilisk. There's also the crane to like load that particular round.
But again, with a weapon this size, you might as well just take an aircraft.
Yeah, you may as well at that point. And we've got better action shots, with a little Death Corps of Kriegsmen with plasma rifle. you
Now,
know.
granted, the Death Corps of Krieg are smaller than your traditional guardsmen.
Yep.
Because Forge World infantry was tiny.
Super tiny. But you can just see how tall these things are compared to them. And
Yep.
even just those doors look almost inaccessible with like no way to actually climb up on the sides. So the doors are functionally useless.
And this guy with a plasma gun can actually kill the tank.
Yep, because, fair and balanced.
Yep. But again, you're shooting a sun at something.
Yeah.
It's going to die. Okay, we see all sorts of different patterns, including yellow, which I absolutely hate.
Bright yellow. And I can... Now, granted, this is... you have the galaxy to go with. I'm sure there's yellow sand somewhere.
I mean, there's black sand in Iceland.
Yep, yeah, volcanoes are a thing. This is like
Stupid.
Everything's covered in sulfur, so we painted our tanks yellow. Like, sure, that's fair.
The red sands of Mars, that makes sense.
Yep. I wish that they brought this back only because this one is specifically a Skitarii regiment.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
A Thunderer of Mars Skitarii Regiment. That is so cool.
Yep.
And there's the Krieg one, there's the Thunderer of the Catachans, the Talarn, and the Palladius? Neat.
Yep, and then an unknown one with pink. A lot of people think that, pink, that wouldn't work really
Isn't
well in any
pink the
environment.
most camouflaged color?
Yeah, pink actually blends in really well because red is hard for the human eye to see. Green is the most visible color because of how the rods and cones in your eye are set up. So something that is green is more visible than something that is red. So on like a mass white landscape, this pink, and this is coming from experience, like pink actually hides really well in snowy landscapes because your eye starts seeing red in the shadows of snowdrifts. So this would actually hide quite well at like a distance, which for this gun is useless.
Oh, yeah.
But if the destroyer was in this camo pattern on a wide open, like icy world, it'd probably hide really well.
There we go. So let's go on to the next page.
And boom.
So, 24 inches, strength 10, so it's stronger than a las cannon.
Yep.
AP 2, Ordnance 1, blast template. 140 points, so it was worth its points
Yep.
if you can get it into range.
And as long as it didn't scatter back on you, which was a thing if you rolled boxcars on the scatter dice.
Yeah, 12 inches.
Yeah, it would move 12 minus 3 for the ballistic skill,
Yeah, so 9 inches.
plus 2.5 for the size of the template. So it would clip you if you fired at its minimum range.
Yep. So we're not really going to go over here. We're not going to go over the Baneblades just yet. That's a separate video.
Aw.
We're going to say that this is a much more efficient vehicle.
Yep.
But we're also going to do the Chimeras in another video. But I'm trying to find the other we're going to go over this
We
too.
have all the ammunition in the back here. I forgot about that.
Where is the recovery vehicle that is also a Leman Russ?
Where are you, Trojan? I know you're here.
Nope, that's not it.
Hydra, Medusas. Man, I love the design of the Medusa.
I love this.
Oh, the totally not from Alien powerlifter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do love that they try to make it look useful. They're like, oh yeah, this is what it's designed to do. It's like, shut up.
Oh, I will gladly defend the powerlifter Sentinel any day of the week.
Same. Little tiny. I found out this was real.
Yep. And they didn't even bother changing the name.
Oh,
Yep.
here it is. The
Yep,
Atlas recovery vehicle. So, we don't have much on it, but actually we have all the same stuff.
Yep.
Its weight is 43 tons, so this one is significantly lighter. Which gives us almost an estimate of how much the ammunition weighs.
Yeah, the ammunition plus the guns and everything.
Yeah. It does have a weapon with the heavy bolter. Let's see. There's 300 rounds for that heavy bolter, so that's quite a bit.
Yep.
And its speed is 34, so it's not the fastest.
Yep, but it can keep up with most of the other Leman Russes.
Yep.
Which is kind of what you would want it for. This would not be a frontline fighting vehicle. You would have these things held
At the
in a
base.
reserve detachment next to the medics and the mechanics. And then when a vehicle goes down, you'd radio in, give your coordinates, and then this would come out and salvage from the vehicle what it could. Or, if you're
Tow the
lucky,
damn
tow
vehicle.
the whole thing.
Now, there is one thing that I do want to point out about this thing. These things were usually implemented where a Valkyrie could not just go to the vehicle and just lift it up. So this would be like urban environments, below rubble and things like that, where it just
Tree
pulls it out.
canopies and things like that as well. Yep.
Or in an area where there's anti-aircraft fire.
Yeah.
So the Atlas would be called in to go there. But again, it's on the Leman Russ chassis, has all the
It's
same
still
weaknesses.
really big.
And one of the worst things is this thing could get stuck in the mud next to the Leman Russ.
Yep. Well, there's one other problem with this one, and I think this is probably the silliest part about this design. Is all right, we're going to take the entire vehicle, and we're going to have it be a Leman Russ. Okay, good. Sounds good. We're going to put a crane on the back. We're going to put a winch. We're going to put a plow. We're going to put a dozer blade. It's got it all. All right, what are we going to do with its armor? Oh, we're going to take all of the armor off of it.
Oh my god, it has no armor.
It has, just to put reference for folks, the whole armor on a standard Leman Russ, as we've seen, copy pasted throughout the entire book, is 150 millimeters on average. This thing is almost half of that at 80 millimeters.
So where the hell is this tonnage coming from?
Yeah, 43 tons, it's weird. It's very bizarre for 43 tons to just appear from nowhere. But also, it's got the same basic engine as everything else does, the
So the engine is the
HR-230 V12. But that also means that anything that couldn't get pulled out by its own power probably couldn't get pulled out by this, because this thing weighs less.
Oh my god.
It's got the same engine, so the odds of this actually recovering you, probably not high.
So this thing's recovering like chimeras.
Yeah, this is probably pulling a chimera, probably just we need to resupply the Thunderer or something with more rounds, wheel this thing out, because the Forge World version of this actually has a little hatch on top that you can model to have rounds being pulled out of the storage container inside of here. Which
Okay.
that's a cool, fun little detail. But yeah, just the fact that they call it it's an all-round engineer vehicle.
Except that it's not.
Except it doesn't really do anything an engineer vehicle does. Even in the modern day, yeah, dozer blades, sure. There's a anti-mine vehicle that the U.S. military uses, where it's essentially a giant drum with chains sticking out
I've
sides.
seen that thing.
Yeah, and you just run it forward and let it blow
Why
stuff
isn't
up.
that in 40K?
I don't know.
Like, that's the most metal thing ever, and if in 40K, they would definitely use that on infantry.
Oh, 100%. Like, I am positive. Like, Orks, I'm sure, technically have used that.
Yeah, the Death Roller.
The Death Roller, yeah. Now I know what I need to model my Death Roller to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and let's see if there's... So, we're in agreement that this vehicle is completely useless.
It just doesn't do the things that it needs to do.
So, let's see if there's any other rhino equivalent. I saw a rhino, sorry. Leman Russ equivalent, and we're going to get to those shells in just a second. Okay.
The nostalgia of seeing all these old profiles.
Army list. I know, right?
Yeah. The old vultures.
I love the vulture design because of the intake of it.
Yeah, the intake's really cool.
Although if you had to kick out the window, it would go right into the engine, blow up the engine.
You're fine. If you're ejecting from a vulture,
The vulture's dead.
the vulture's dead. You don't have to worry about the engine.
Kind of like an A-10 Warthog. If the A-10 Warthog is finally going down, you're dead.
You'll be fine.
You probably died and the thing will still come back and do a bombing
Yeah,
run.
it probably will.
And it has one wing, it comes back, you're dead if there's no pilot.
Yeah, the thing fires 7,000 rounds of freedom to break itself. Like, it's
Okay,
hilarious.
so...
Oh, yeah, here we go. The turret emplacements. So I think this one deserves a little bit of explaining for folks who didn't play in ye old days.
Yep.
So the turret emplacements, do we have like a full-blown thing for it too? We do! Oh my lord. Okay, the turret emplacements are really cool. Because they were essentially, you could take the turret off of any Leman Russ variant and throw it on top of what was essentially a small bunker, and these counted as your troops for
Yep.
tank companies. So you would have 6 of these just all lined up, and I love that they finally admit it's like, hey, everything is variable.
Yeah, finally, right?
It's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it, it's variable. It's 1.3 meters plus the turret. So this thing is tiny. I am 1.3 meters tall almost. Like, and I've jumped out of airplanes professionally for a living, so...
So these things are very low to the ground, and they can be airdropped in.
Yeah, they can be airdropped in, just like the Sentinel batteries could be. There is no maximum speed on or off-road.
What? This thing can't...
I know,
Wow.
right? It
Can't move.
Can't do donuts or anything.
It's useless.
But all of this is just utter insanity. But if this was a thing that could exist in the real world, I would love to have a few
Now-
and any like military.
Do you want to hear something even crazier about them?
Of course.
So there's no crew to them.
Yep.
It's
automated.
It's all automated and all with servitors inside it. And servitors in
Technically
40K
not
don't
crew.
count as
Yeah.
crew, they count as a part of the machine.
They stopped being human a while ago.
Yeah. Well, technically they still have their mind, they're just lobotomized.
I love that there's 2 of them in there, a gunner and a loader.
Yep.
Couldn't even bother to automate the loading system. Thank you, Mechanicus.
Now, there might be a loader that is a replacement for the autoloader.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
And
Gene Forged Cherub.
now the other thing is you can get a plasma cannon
You can
one.
get plasma cannon one. Even just the heavy bolter one is kind of hilarious. Like it just looks weird, but in that is one of the more 40K things you'd ever see.
Oh, the flamethrowers.
The flamethrowers, the Vanquisher turret,
It's just
like
which I'm pretty sure would just fly off.
this. Like there's so much nostalgia built into these, just because I remember when these got released and I had never seen them before. And I showed up to an event, and I was playing Dark Eldar at the time. I was going through a very edgy phase.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I showed up with, like, here are my incubi, everyone's in Reapers, and I just see a line of these squat little things, and he just deployed them out, and he's like, okay, I'm going to start putting the turrets down on all of them. And they're all just the baseline Leman Russ gun, and I was just like, what are those? He's like, oh, these are my troop choices, because Forge World said so. It's like, this is madness.
No, this is Sparta.
No, it was a slaughter.
That is hilarious. But that's the most Imperial Guard thing to do.
It is. It's like, wow, that's
And
just
you
a fort out of the middle of nowhere.
And you see these things on all of their buildings.
Yep.
So, like, sieging a city in 40K is incredibly difficult.
It'd be a nightmare.
It'd be like, okay, we hit out the left wall. Yeah, the right wall has like 8 heavy bolters shooting us.
Yeah, this is all just excess.
Yep.
And I love that. I want to have been a fly on the wall to see the design process for these.
You just know that was just that one guy who's just like, he's like playing with his turret on the table and stuff, and he's just like, and he puts the top of it.
Yeah, the tank's just broke in half, and he was like, oh, and he just set it down. Wait a second.
Wait a second, big brain moment.
Thank you, I have an idea.
We do see things kind of like this in real world where they drop artillery.
Yeah, well, a lot of the times when we do that stuff, it's really cool to see happen. It is very rare, but the idea of just, here's a heavily fortified position just dropped out of the sky is something that we looked into quite a bit in the 80s. Like the idea of like, let's just drop heavily armored, like essentially fighting positions into place before anyone even shows up. And there was like it led to this whole design process where we talked about rapid fortifications.
Oh my god, that is terrific.
Yeah, the closest we ever got is now there are semi-trucks that you can have, they shoot spikes out of the back of the truck into the ground, and then as the truck drives away, it's just barbed wire flows out of the truck.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
It's very cool. It's very therapeutic to watch happen, too. It's like the world's biggest, like, danger slinky.
All right, and what else do we have? We have the sentry guns, which that makes sense for the most part for 40k.
Yeah.
Again, another quick thing that they can drop, which have multi-lasers, las cannons, which again is an anti-tank weapon that you can barely see because these things are tiny.
Yeah.
Oh, these things are... Wait, where's the...
So the height, 1.6 meters.
Yeah, these things are tiny.
Yeah. And of course, Metallica Tarantula being their name, they are the next Metallica album.
So
yeah.
Now we're just going to go over the
Lots of
munitions, and that's going to wrap up for this video. And then next video we'll go over the other tanks in 40k. Mm-hmm. So we just saw this and we both just nerded out about it.
Just could not stop ourselves. We do not apologize.
So the last thing we're going to cover is the munitions. And yeah, there's a lot here. Mostly we're just looking at the Leman Russ variants to see if we can figure out what the hell this thing is shooting.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, a lot of these are fairly accurate for what you'd expect to see in a shell. There is one issue that I have with some of them, and it's these little divots. So whenever you see a shell or a round that has a divot, it means that there's way more propellant than the round normally needs. Take like a 9mm bullet, for example, which we could if you wanted to.
No.
So most bullets are going to be straight, similar to this one here. And this is the Conqueror anti-tank shell. So worst of the Leman Russes has the most reasonable round.
That makes sense for 40k.
It really does. When you neck down a cartridge, when these things fire, the casing is going to expand to fill the rest of the barrel. That's why when you fire a large round, all the gas and propellant doesn't just go everywhere. And the round is able to exit the way it's supposed to, because this helps make an airtight seal. When it's necked down like this, you're essentially taking the normal operating procedure for the round and saying, no, I want to go faster.
Okay, and so, that's a high explosive shell. So that shell should be this one versus the anti-tank shell, which should...
could be. The big issue, so essentially all this is saying is like, the bore on the Leman Russes, they're actually firing larger caliber rounds than we initially would have thought, because the breach on these things would be massive. The breach is where the round sits before it's fired. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at like a standard tank, everything south of the pencil is inside what's called the battery. Everything forward is going to be actually in the barrel of the weapon itself. And so when it all fires, these separate, this gets, I assume, kicked out somewhere outside of the vehicle.
Because there is no way for it to.
A lot of them have a lot of weapons will have a little extractor. So it's a tiny little piece of metal, like no bigger than my thumb. And all it does is it sits there. And it waits for the round to be fired. And then as the round is drawn back out of battery, it grabs it and kicks it down. You can like break an arm or a leg taking a giant casing to them after it's been ejected, because they're going like fast.
So let's take a look at the cannons themselves really quickly.
Yeah. Like this is all going to happen inside the turret.
Okay, so there's a chance that it just comes protruding out of the turret?
Oh, no. The round's gone. The casing is in the tank still. It's just somewhere in there. So if we went all the way back to that cross-section, which was somewhere
It's
near
after
here.
the Luminosas.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find it some other day. Or go back, rewind, and find it yourself.
Now I'm curious. Sorry.
No, you're good. I could have sworn it was before.
I think it was right after.
Place your bets now.
You know what? We're probably not going to find it. It's after the Vanquisher.
There we go.
So we need to find
Right.
the Vanquisher.
Oh, almost there. Keep going.
So there's the Vanquisher.
Oh, yep, keep going. It's on the other side of the riverbed. Yep, because it was like...
There it is.
There we go. So, keeping in mind that... So the front of the round is sitting right about here. Everything
right
back
here, actually.
Yep.
So that's where the round is going.
Yep, and so once it's fired, that case is going to come back. This is the breech right here. So the breech just means the farthest back part of the cannon. That round is either going to come out automatically at speed, or someone is going to have to manually open this breech, pull it out, and then store it somewhere down here. It's just a big logistical mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, meanwhile, so here's something
And
that...
he's the commander of the tank who's just going to get belted in the face with this thing.
Yeah, hopefully he'd be offset, like one would hope. But again, this is 40k. Maybe the commander does die on the first round, leaving the barrel.
They put the commissar there.
Yeah, but here's a cool little fact that I didn't realize we didn't talk about. Everyone assumes that these big guns have triggers. They do, but it's a giant foot pedal.
Really?
Yep, they're almost all fired by your feet. And that's a safety precaution because it takes so much more effort to point your toe down than it does to twitch a finger or to depress your thumb, that there's almost never been like accidental firing of these things. If you have like restless leg syndrome, you don't get to be a gunner on a tank. Yeah, that's a legitimate thing in the US Army. If they find out you have that, you will never become a gunner.
Oh.
Because what if your leg just starts ticking off and it starts firing rounds? It's a bad day for everyone involved.
Now, again, on here, we can actually see the different rounds that are in it.
Yep.
And there's 6 rounds in this, right here in this picture, and they're probably just lined up.
8, actually, because we got 2 more stacked vertically on the sides there.
Which they all should be stacked vertically, but that's a whole different story.
That's storage. I'm not going to fight the commissariat on that one. I'm sure there's a regulation about it somewhere. Yeah, and what's really cool is they do break down kind of everything about these, like from the ballistic cap, which is essentially the very front part, the part that's going to pierce the armor. Because it's not all one giant contiguous piece of metal. They're going to be like staged portions. Because
So it's like a rocket.
kind of like a rocket, except just no fuel on the inside. But there are going to be parts that you can like screw on and screw off.
It's a rocket assisted.
Oh yeah, for the Baneblades?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what all those fins and everything are for. So always remind your opponent that the Baneblade shoots rockets.
It's not a Baneblade cannon, it's a Baneblade rocket launcher.
It's just so ridiculous.
The Baneblade is ridiculous. We're going to get to that in the Baneblade video, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, those things are just insane. So like it breaks down everything from the shell casings, propellants, tracers. Like, yes, tanks can have tracers. Do they? Not very often, mainly because the impact of a tank round is so massive you can tell where it went.
Yeah.
Tracers are more for tracing bullet paths to a specific thing. Do some tanks carry tracers? Yes, but they'll almost always be command vehicles. And the same is true of standard soldiers. Not every infantryman has a magazine full of tracer rounds, but if you're a squad leader or a platoon leader, then yeah, you'd have like a magazine full of tracer rounds to fire at a target that you want everyone else to shoot at. Because that's the easiest form of communication, is to just point. And tracers are just pointing from a distance.
That's fair. It's like a laser pointer.
Yep, especially if you just hold down the trigger.
I was trying to read here to see if we get any type of
It's like
size,
caliber size or anything? No?
you know, actually useful information.
Nothing?
No.
Well, here's the crazy thing. Like, here are a bunch of autocannon rounds down here, like these tiny little things here. So autocannons are going to be anywhere from 20 to 40 millimeters for their caliber. So, not sponsored, but like a Dunkin' Donuts cup, the bottom part, that's about 40 millimeters. Like your standard bases for Terminators, that's about 40 millimeters. So that's the bottom of the round. That is this. So you can imagine just how massive some of these are. Like, we're talking 155 to 200 millimeters.
Does that kind of stuff exist today?
Yeah, it's our like mainline cannons are 155 millimeter howitzers in the U.S. military.
Okay.
Like, they exist. They're big. They're real silly.
I love them.
Yeah, you just it is 40K. Everything is turned up to 11 and left at 11.
So we have the Infernus shell.
Yep.
Which I would love to read more about all of these different shells and what they do. A smoke shell?
Yep, smoke, like, because remember, the smoke launchers for your defense, they happen just right next to you. This would be, I want smoke over there. Like, you would normally fire smoke in front of an anti-tank position that you are aware of. That way you can actually maneuver safely, get out of its range. The Infernus ones, those are essentially white phosphorus rounds.
I wish they would bring back phosphorus grenades.
Yeah. I mean, 30K has some interesting moments. Almost
So do
all of them
Sisters from
involve
3rd edition.
phosphorus, yeah. Yeah,
And I
white
love
phosphorus is legitimately nasty. Like, it is not something that's used lightly. The U.S. military does still use it. A lot of countries disagree with this. I personally disagree with it. Because it's not only does it burn, but it's also toxic.
Oh, lovely.
So not just the smoke you breathe, but if it gets on you and it leaches into your system, you'll die of toxic shock from the poisoning that happens when the phosphorus mixes with your blood.
Awesome.
So it is horrific stuff. It is not fun for anyone involved. But that's what's in that thing. And the reason you see this whole sort of staged look to it, each one of those ring segments is probably a different setting for a fuse. So you could probably click those over, especially this front one. Click it to a certain setting to have it detonate on impact at a certain altitude, after a certain flight time, after a certain distance traveled. Like, there's all sorts of crazy fuses that exist in the modern day. So I can only imagine
all of the ridiculous ones that would exist then.
Yeah, there's probably a servitor brain inside there that just thinks now and detonates itself.
Yep. So now that we've seen all of these, and we have a basic understanding of them.
Yep. Oh, and here's your individual breakdowns. How close was I to being right? Yeah, pretty close. So yeah, like, I wish we had known about these before I embarrassed myself. But as you can see, like, they've got like
that's funny.
Yeah, it's always fun. So yeah, there's like stages to the metallurgy inside. There's a whole like complex system of fuses and explosives.
And this is all comparable to real world.
Yeah, these could be ripped out of like any manual that exists. Like, here is our fun little push pin shaped anti-tank round with like the solid core inside, which that would be like your depleted uranium core, and everything else is just steel covering. Demolisher shell, like, yeah, it's just a big old shell. If they only gave us a millimeter, we could scale all these off, but I'm not seeing them anywhere.
We can also tell their weight too.
Yeah, we could figure out a lot of things from that. But yeah, like, even if you see over here, like the incendiary round that the Lehman Russ fires, apparently the Mark 7 G4.
The cool thing about this was a rules section for back in the day. So all of your vehicles had these. Mm-hmm. So if you had this book back in 4th edition, 5th edition.
Yep, you could load them up, customize with everything.
Yep.
Yep, and swap through them, which, again, that's
Makes
a fairly
sense.
real world thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you load out for the mission that you're going to do.
And there's a smoke shell.
Yeah, incendiary round, smoke shell. And again, like, you just see it's like, oh, so there's ballistic cap, the warhead itself for the penetration portion of it, remote tubes, so remote tubes would actually be a thing that you see in some types of munitions. It's essentially a little spacer that you can either put control mechanisms inside, or it acts as a crush zone, so it's an area that's meant to have everything else crush into it.
Okay.
So that rather than the entire shell just being destroyed upon impact, it actually just essentially breaks the front part, and the rest of it survives. And that's good for like these smoke casters, which you want to be able to disperse in a very specific way over a very specific area.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Also, orcs couldn't take these.
Yeah, that's right. You could throw them into the random cannons.
Also, Space Marine Vindicators and Chaos Defilers, looted orc vehicles can also use these rules, but orcs cannot take specialist or rare shells. Very keen orc players might want to consider replacing battle cannons on looted vehicles with their own cannons.
Yep.
That's funny.
Oh.
So back in the day, you had the looted vehicles where you could either have the looted gun or the actual gun itself on it.
Oh yeah, look, in furnace shells, it's phosphorine, incendiary, and thermite shells. So yep, it's white phosphorus. Oxy phosphor gel, white phosphorus, or thermite.
That's nasty.
Yeah, that is not fun.
Alright, so let's see if this continues. And the next part, it does. These are rare shells. And then it tells us the ammunition in it, because back in the day you had to keep track of that.
Yep, was it high explosive or anti-tank? Because you had to declare which one you were shooting.
Yep.
Yep, and then measure range, and then fire your gun.
Which was so good. So we have another shell here, which this one is the Conqueror's Round, which has an impact detonator. So this one explodes on impact.
Yep.
Okay.
I want to point out the very last sentence in its description. It was not regarded as a success, and few shells were produced now. Much like the Conqueror itself.
Yeah. So, that is everything for the standard Leman Russ
In one book.
in this one book.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, never say that GW and Forge World don't put out extra crazy rules, because once upon a time,
There were so many of them.
it was nothing but crazy rules.
Yep. Oops, sorry.
Oop.
Smack the camera again because I am a genius. So, all in all, the Baneblade, not the Baneblade, the Leman Russ. I saw the Baneblade. I am excited about doing the Baneblade at some point in the
That
future.
one will be great. But
What do you think about it? If you had to face that tank today, do you think you could beat it?
I think most infantry squads are well equipped to defeat tanks right now, just as they are. Every infantry squad carries around somebody with an anti-tank weapon, and when you get advanced training, you learn that the easiest way to defeat a tank is honestly the simplest tool that Russians have ever made, the Molotov cocktail.
And now explain that one.
So when we looked at all the tanks, everyone should have noticed that I was gushing over how the back ends of a lot of the tanks were designed, because this is fairly accurate, because that's where you have to put everything. Like, it makes sense for the engine to be in the back, because you have to balance the heavy engine with the heavy front armor. It makes sense to store the ammunition in the back. This also means most of your venting and everything is also in the back. And in order to defeat most tanks, and this is something that was found out when tanks became popular in World War I and then later in World War II, we saw it again in the Korean War. It was used against American vehicles in Vietnam and then Iraq and Afghanistan. If you can get something over the vents, over the heat exchangers, the things that keep the engine from overheating, that keep the oxygen flowing into the vehicle, and that thing happens to be, fire, the tank is going to stop working probably sooner than the actual crew itself was. And then there's actual drills and training we go through for breaking into a tank, which this giant space between the ground and the bottom of the tank, I would put all sorts of explosives under there and then walk away and detonate the thing. It's much simpler than trying to open a hatch and then fight 4 guys who are all pointing their carbines out the top. So
do you think this tank would be easier to take down than an Abrams?
Definitely. The Abrams is just so fast. It is very, very quick. It has lots of cool high-tech systems in it. But the biggest part is it's just very quick. If you are fast on the battlefield, you are that much harder to hit. Yeah, fast, small, and you carry a big gun. Like, you don't have to be a glass hammer or to, like, be good in anything. And the Abrams, it's double the speed of these things, has the same armor in the parts that matter. From the size, we can guess it's like a 155, so it's about the same cannon. Yeah, I think like an Abrams or like a Leopard could beat a Lehman Russ, and I'd be willing to like stake a claim on that.
Now, granted, there is the las cannon, which is an instantaneous laser weapon that can kill it instantly.
Yeah. All I can say and hope is that
they miss.
The average guardsman misses 50% of the time almost. So that's if you missed 50% of the time in any modern military, you would not be allowed anywhere near a weapon. Like you would qualify once a year, and then they would send you back home.
Oh my god, that's good. That's good. But assuming the las cannon missed, you could kill this tank.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident of that.
Now, even regiment versus regiment, 100 tanks versus 100 tanks, how many do you think you would lose? About 50% of them?
Oh, yeah, probably like anywhere from 30 to 50%, I'd say would be like gracious, just because eventually those las cannons will start hitting, and once the las cannons start hitting, like, it's sci-fi technology. Modern technology just can't touch it.
Yep. So, again, attrition warfare, the Imperium will win, but one-on-one, Imperium loses quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank Sterling for joining me for this and explaining pretty much everything forever.
No, it's my pleasure. You know I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get into the other tanks, and I know we're both excited about like the Manticores, the Hydras, and we're going to do all of these in one video too, because they're all on the Chimera chassis.
Yep.
So that video is going to be like 3 hours again, and then we're going to do, then we're going to do the Baneblade, wherever it is, and then we want to tackle the aircrafts. Do you know enough about aircrafts?
Yeah, I was actually raised by an Air Force historian, and most of my service was working with units who were close air support units or stationed on air bases, so I know quite a few pilots.
So, that was Imperial Armor 1, Volume 1, the Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy. And we're going to continue to go over this book, and I'm going to try my hardest to get the other one that goes into the more sci-fi based and bug based enemies and see how we would deal with them in a real world setting.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to fight a Hierophant.
Yeah, thing's terrifying. Those are really thin. So, with that all said, I want to know your comments in the comment section down below. You probably have like a million of them. Sterling is a military expert, one of my close friends and co-worker here at Games U. We're not in Mesa, where are we?
We're in Gilbert. Mesa's on the other side of the street.
Yep. We're in Gilbert, Arizona. You guys can come in and visit. Check this place out. As always, I'm NornQueenAlexis. I love you guys. Bye.